Chapter 240. How could the two of them have imagined that a kitten that had not been weaned on its mother's milk could be so lethal? Caught off guard, they were caught off guard and fell into the trap. However, when they wanted to catch the kitten and beat it to death to vent their anger, they found that it was nowhere to be found. After cursing and swearing, they were no longer conflicted. After all, they were from the Four Seasons Tower, none of them were ordinary people. Han Wufei's accidental death was a fact, but the things he had left behind might leave some clues. Thinking of this, both of them tensed up, activating their mystical chi cultivation base and diving into the sea of fire. It was a pity that they cursed again after searching the place with great effort. Who was the one who did this? Why was it like a locust swarm had swept through the place? All the valuables had been swept clean, leaving nothing behind. It was even more thorough than a bandit's robbery. Even the other secret chamber within the secret chamber was empty. We have to go back and report this to the Lord quickly. Some news must have been leaked. One of them spoke hastily with a grim expression. That's right. Shen Yusher had just met with an accident a few days ago. That place is the most suspicious. The entire Hall of Nine Moons had just finished assembling. Just as they were about to be handed over to him, something happened at this juncture. Han Wufei has been inexplicably implicated as well. If the culprit is the same person, not only is he resourceful, he might even be targeting the Four Seasons Tower. You're right, go back quickly. Both of them disappeared with a swoosh. On the other side, the assassination of Yang Buotao was not as easy as targeting Han Wufei. Yang Buotao was Yutong's military general. Purely in terms of status, he was only below Tai Zheng. He was one of the top 10 heavyweights in Yutong's military and was the marshal of the northern troop. Once this person was touched, there would be a great deal of repercussions. In other words, Yang Buotao was not on the same level as Shen Yusher, Han Wufei, and the others. Yun Yang and Fang Mafei sneaked into the residence of Yang. According to the plan, Yun Yang disappeared into the dark in a flash while Fang Mafei, who was dressed in black and masked, strode forward without saying a word. Ignoring any questions, he lifted his leg and kicked the door of the general's residence over. With a loud bang, the entire door flew into the sky. Then, Fang Mafei charged in with a long howl. Fang Mafei's current cultivation base was already at the pinnacle of the 8th peak. His ability was comparable to Mi Kongquan in his most powerful state, perhaps even superior. Now that he was unleashing his full power, the lethality was not to be underestimated. He killed his way in like a hot knife through butter, and all who obstructed him were swept away. Under normal circumstances, one's cultivation base of the 8th peak could be considered as a top-notch expert. With such skills, it was more than enough to snipe Tai Zheng, who was not within the range of the military formation. Therefore, Fang Mafei's one-sided massacre was not surprising at all, it was within reason. It was a pity that his aggressive advance did not last long. He had only taken a few steps into the second courtyard when he was met with an unusually strong obstruction. In the darkness, a few black shadows that had been hiding somewhere suddenly flew out like giant birds, pouncing at Fang Mafei from 7 to 8 directions at the same time. At the same time, a sharp whistle rang out. All the ordinary soldiers and generals in the general's residence disappeared, replaced by teams of elite troops clad in steel armor that emerged from the darkness. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. These people all climbed up the 4 high walls, and even the trees and roofs were densely packed. Cracking sounds could be heard as hundreds of steel bows were drawn to the fullest at the same time. Steel arrows were nocked, gleaming with a cold gleam. His momentum was unstoppable and terrifying to the extreme. Not only was Fang Mafei, who had been attacking aggressively, suppressed, he was also locked on by countless arrows. He was like a beast that had fallen into a death trap, turning from a predator to a prey. As the tables turned, the main room's door opened abruptly. Inside, a dozen men in green walked out with their arms behind their backs, their eyes glinting coldly as they focused on Fang Mafei's battle. Following them were two old men, one on the left and one on the right. They walked out slowly, calm and composed. The last one to appear was Yang Butao, who stood in the middle. He was dressed casually, his physique tall and muscular, his face square, his eyes watching the scene like a hawk. "They've come," Yang Butao ordered, "light the fire." Following a loud boom, thousands of torches were suddenly lit up in the second courtyard of the general's mansion. The entire place was illuminated as if it was daytime, and even the slightest detail could be seen. From the moment the door was breached, Fang Mafei had only charged into the space of less than 1,000 feet. He had just entered the second courtyard when he was stopped. The weakest of the experts fighting with him now was at least of the 7th peak level. This was a ridiculous and extravagant lineup. Forget Tai Zheng's guards, even the 8 top-notch guards of Han Sanhe the other day were no better than this, perhaps even slightly weaker. How could Yang Butao have such a strong lineup of guards? Fang Mafei dashed left and right, attacking ferociously, but he could not even break through the encirclement, what more to kill Yang Butao. Even when he was in danger, Fang Mafei did not show the slightest hint of fear. He let out a thunderous roar, the sword in his hand swinging and closing, glinting coldly as he attacked with all his might. Swoosh! An arrow suddenly shot out from the roof, like a comet chasing after the moon, arriving in a flash. Be it the timing, direction, or angle of this arrow, every point was just right. The enemies on all sides had shifted and revealed Fang Mafei's silhouette. Moreover, the instant he stepped forward, it was as if a white steed had flashed across a crevice. Clang! Fang Mafei deflected the incoming arrow with a swing of his sword, the sword in his hand actually trembling as he felt a strong vibration in his wrist. He could not help blurting out, "Deicide bow." Not only was the arrow's landing spot perfect, the angle and timing were superb, its lethality was equally shocking. It was an arrow from the Deicide bow. Someone among the attackers snickered coldly. "Not bad, you're quite knowledgeable." "It's the Deicide bow." Deicide bow. The mystical steel arrow. It was rumored that the Deicide bow was forged from the horn of a 6th-level mystical beast, the armored rhinoceros, and the bowstring was made from the beast's tendon. As for the mystical steel arrow, although the shaft was only forged from fine steel, the arrowhead was forged from the actual mystical steel. An ordinary shot that could shoot an arrow from 100 feet away was a joke to the archer who wielded the Deicide bow, it was worthless. An ordinary bow and arrow could only be considered a super-strong bow if it had the strength of 8 stones and above. It could be said that it was invincible on the battlefield. However, the Deicide bow required at least a strength of 30 stones and above to fully draw the bow. With such strength, even a cultivator who had reached the 3rd or 4th level of mystical chi would find it difficult to draw the bow perfectly. Not to mention the need to aim for a long period of time, maintain the stability of the bow, and fire continuously, it was even more difficult. However, once the archer of the Deicide bow was successful, an arrow released would have the power to split rocks. If 10,000 arrows were to be released at once, even a grandmaster perfected expert would die under the arrows. If that was not the case, how would it be known as the Deicide bow? The original intention of the Deicide bow's creator was that even if the gods descended from heaven, they would be slain by such a bow and arrow. However, the materials for the Deicide bow were extremely rare. An armored rhinoceros only had 2 horns, and 1 horn was just enough to make a Deicide bow. Even if there was an extra horn, it would be difficult to make use of it, not to mention the restriction of the bowstring made from mystical beast tendons. Hence, this bow had always been used as a secret weapon in the military formation. It would only be used when they encountered a strong opponent, such as an invincible general like Shangguan Wudi. No one would have guessed that General Yang Butao's house actually had more than 400 of them. Moreover, there were more than 400 archers who could control the deicide bow freely. Anyone who could use the deicide bow, at least to an archer, was definitely an expert among experts. The hearts of these archers had to be as calm as ice and snow. These people had always been the killing gods of the battle formation. They could move freely and decide when to release the arrow. Each of them had a unique mind and were unpredictable. However, once they released the arrow, an enemy general would definitely fall. After all, the mystical steel arrow that went with the deicide bow was also a rare and precious item. Any mistake would be a great waste. Fang Mafei's expression was indifferent, but he was actually groaning in his heart. To Fang Mafei, he had thought that he could go on a killing spree with his cultivation base breakthrough and show off his prowess. In the end, he had fallen into an unprecedented trap the moment he came out. The situation was actually unprecedentedly dangerous. Putting aside the fact that the enemies that surrounded him from all directions had already trapped him and the chances of him breaking out were minuscule, those at the door who had yet to make a move must be even more terrifying. These people were enough to kill him over and over again. That was not all, there were still 400 to 500 deicide bows aimed at him. They're thinking too highly of me. They're practically treating me like Ling Xiaozue. Fang Mafei's emphasis on the deicide bow was higher than that of the people who were attacking him. As an assassin, he knew all too well the terrifying power of the deicide bow. If he were to be shot, he would be severely injured even if he did not die. His ability would be diminished. To him now, the deicide bow was like a demonic hand that could take his life at any time. It was difficult to avoid, helpless. Swoosh! It was another arrow. As Fang Mafei dodged it with all his might, he revealed a slight opening and was struck on his back. If it were not for his killer instinct that allowed him to deflect the force the moment he was struck, he would have been severely injured. Even so, he almost cried out in pain. The mystical steel arrow that had been evaded plunged into the ground with a swoosh. It went straight into the ground, not even the tip of the arrowhead could be seen. It was completely embedded in the ground. Chapter 241. The moment Fang Mafei thought of this, he calmed himself down and his fighting spirit increased. Now that the situation was clear and there was a huge disparity between the strong and the weak, he believed that his young master would be able to make the right choice. As long as his young master did not force himself to attack, he would not be exposed. Even if he were to die here, it would be worth it. Of course, if he could drag a few of them down with him at the last moment, it would be even more profitable. Fang Mafei's long sword trembled and he suddenly let out a long howl. His voice was unprecedentedly fierce, piercing through the clouds and splitting the sky. The sword light that erupted was endless, rolling like a dragon as it dashed left and right. It was extremely valiant and imposing, forcing the 8 experts who were surrounding him into a disadvantageous position. He's fighting with all his might. Unfortunately, he's just trying to show off his bravery. He can only gain the upper hand for a moment before he falls back into a hopeless situation and dies in an instant. One of the people watching from afar smiled faintly. Before he finished speaking, someone beside him chuckled. It's such a big fight, it'd be a pity if he dies in a siege. Let me accompany him and have some fun. As soon as he finished speaking, he moved 80 feet away and was already above the battlefield. With a shout, a long saber appeared out of thin air. He swung the saber in a circle and wielded it like a hammer, smashing it down with the force of a mountain. Fang Mafei did not dare to be careless and defended with all his might. It was a pity that he had pushed his cultivation base to the limit and gained a temporary advantage. In reality, it was like drinking poison to quench his thirst and did not benefit the battle at all. Instead, he had expended a great deal of his vitality. Although he was not completely exhausted, he had lost much of his edge. The saber user who joined in later not only had a higher cultivation base than Fang Mafei, he aimed at the moment when Fang Mafei had used up all his strength and had yet to recover. He was bullying the weak, so how could Fang Mafei defend himself? With a loud crack, the sword in Fang Mafei's hand broke into two. He spat out a mouthful of blood as he staggered backward unsteadily. Amidst this, a saber landed on his shoulder and a palm landed on his back. If Fang Mafei had not held on with all his might, he would have fallen to the ground. Fang Mafei's mind was still calm, but he felt his internal organs burning and his skills dissipating. There was only one thought in his mind: young master, please don't appear. Please don't appear. Hurry up and leave. However, just as Fang Mafei had lost all hope and was no longer able to defend himself, a sudden gust of wind blew in the sky above the Yang residence without warning. In an instant, sand and pebbles were sent flying. Even the archers on the tree fell with a thud. In the blink of an eye, the hurricane that had swept through the entire area turned into a tornado, rushing towards Yang Butao like a raging dragon. Someone in the crowd could not help but exclaim, "It's supreme wind?" Yang Butao and the people around him glared at the person who had spoken, wishing they could cut him into pieces. A gale swept across the ground. The two old men beside Yang Butao had gloomy expressions on their faces. The corners of their mouths revealed a hint of undisguised mockery. They took a step forward at the same time, and like two majestic mountains, they blocked the hurricane head-on. With a loud bang, the incoming wind was like a mountain crashing into it. Completely without any effect, it changed direction and soared into the sky. The cultivation base of the two old men was obviously much stronger than the rest of the people present. Moreover, the two of them had joined forces to attack. Even though the hurricane was unstoppable, it could not break through the strong defensive line formed by the two men. Although the wind had changed direction, it did not seem to stop. Instead, it swept up more grass, trees, sand, and pebbles, covering the sun and sky in an instant. One could not even see one's fingers if one stretched out one's hand. Then, a ray of fire appeared, burning fiercely in the middle of the battle. Yang Butao's subordinates were indeed elites. There was no hesitation in the face of such a drastic change. With a loud bang, a large pit was smashed into the ground. Everyone had acted in unison to extinguish the abrupt fire. The hurricane rose up like a raging dragon. One could vaguely see a human figure in the middle of the hurricane. A leisurely voice spoke, "Yang Butao, as an important general of the empire, you do not wish to serve the country but collude with the enemy to frame my 9 Supremes brothers. Your crime is unpardonable. Today, I will only mete out a light punishment. If you dare to commit the offense again, you will be beheaded without mercy." The voice rose slowly, coming from afar. Everyone present could hear it clearly. The sound of the wind finally subsided. There was a large pit in the residence of Yang's field. The masked man in black who was severely injured just now was nowhere to be seen. The two elders beside Yang Butao had disappeared without a trace as well. They had given chase, but it was unknown if they could still catch up to them. Yang Butao's expression was solemn, his eyes filled with rage. At this moment, a portion of the archers on the surrounding walls were stunned. Bewildered gazes looked from all directions, focusing on Yang Butao. Was the person who had spoken just now the long-awaited Lord Supreme Wind? Was what he had said just now true? Was it really Yang Butao who had gone mad and colluded with the enemy to murder the 9 Supremes Lords? There was no factual basis for this matter, nor was there any witness or evidence. There was no room for it to be believed. However, it was Supreme Flame and Supreme Wind who had appeared just now. There was no falsehood in this. They were all people who had been through the battlefield and had the experience of fighting alongside the 9 Supremes Lords many times. There was no mistaking this familiar feeling. If these words had come from the mouths of these two lords, was there a need for proof? There was no need. The Empire of Yutong's military would never doubt the words of the 9 Supremes Lords, no matter what the content was. There was no room for doubt. Clang! An archer who had been standing on the wall retracted his deicide bow and hopped down from the ground. He took a few large strides and came before Yang Butao, asking loudly, "Marshal Yang, may I ask if what Lord Supreme Wind said just now is true?" As the words left his mouth, the gazes of countless archers shot over like sharp arrows from all directions. Other than the 100 archers from Yang Butao's troop, the rest of the archers were all staring at Yang Butao with burning gazes. Even the archers from Yang Butao's troop had lowered their heads and perked up their ears, waiting for Yang Butao's reply. Yang Butao's expression darkened as he hollered, "It was just the ramblings of the assassin who attacked just now, trying to mislead us. Why did all of you join in the commotion? Didn't you all see the assassin trying to kill me just now? Military orders must be obeyed. Do all of you want to give it a try?" The military's actions were based on absolute obedience to the superior's orders. Any action that questioned the superior's orders was a crime deserving of death. Under normal circumstances, when Yang Butao had spoken, everyone dared not say anything, even if they still had doubts in their hearts. Unexpectedly, the archer who had stood up to ask the question said loudly, "This lowly official's confusion doesn't lie with me but with the 9 Supreme's lords. I hope that Marshal Yang can clear up our doubts. If there's anything that violates the military law, this lowly official will shoulder it all and apologize with my death later." But it was the 2 masters of wind and fire who showed up just now, and they were good at the fire and wind supernatural powers. Since the 2 masters appeared here and even pointed at the marshal, there must be a reason. This is related to Yutong's national affairs. This lowly official's life is not worth mentioning, but this matter must be clarified. Everyone knows that the marshal is the empire's pillar, the protector of the border. Why would the 9 Supreme's lords come looking for trouble with the marshal in such a blatant manner and even say that Sir is suspected of harming the 9 Supreme's lords? The archer said boldly, "Marshal, please clear up our doubts." Before his words echoed in the air, the 300 archers behind him spoke in unison, "Marshal, please clear up our doubts." Yang Butao's expression was as dark as ink as he said in a low voice, "There's an assassin trying to kill me in broad daylight. You all..." Before he finished, a man in green beside him said, "Marshal Yang, there are only 2 assassins here today. One is the assassin who attacked us earlier. His moves are brutal and brutal. The other person's cultivation method is strange, but his strength is not high. The move of throwing the fireball is probably from the Thunderbolt Hall. However, the other person's method of turning mystical chi into gang and moving like the wind, is even more strange and inexplicable. We can't underestimate him." Nominally, this was an analysis of the assassin's background, but it was actually a roundabout way to provide a reason for Yang Butao to deal with the doubts. Yang Butao understood. He frowned and said, 2 people? Not 3 people? The man came out in a flash and picked up something from the pit. He said, "Marshal Yang, please look at this kerosene that hasn't burned out yet. This kerosene is bright and faintly glows with a green luster. It's clearly the unique kerosene of the Thunderbolt Hall's clear sky thunder fire. However, I don't know when Marshal offended the Thunderbolt Hall and caused this assassination." Yang Butao frowned and sighed deeply. He said, "About a year ago, the young master of the Thunderbolt Hall entered my service. His original intention was to use his military merits for promotion, but I beheaded him for violating military law. Sigh. Although I have a clear conscience in handling this matter, the military law is still too strict. However, it was a war at that time and I really couldn't show mercy outside the law." "I see. In a war, military law comes first. Lawbreakers must be punished and law enforcement must be strict. This is how it should be." The man in green said, "However, the power of the Thunderbolt Hall is too great. Marshal, you should be careful from now on and not be taken advantage of." Yang Butao shook his head and sighed. "How can the military law be lenient? Even if I had to do it all over again, would still enforce the law strictly. There's no room for discussion. So what if the Thunderbolt Hall comes looking for trouble with me? Yang Buitao said righteously, I'm just worried that the enemy is full of tricks and that our brothers will think too much. Another person hollered with a dark expression, did everyone hear that? Don't just listen to rumors in the future. If you believe a few words spoken by an assassin, won't any random person be able to shake the military's morale with just a few words? What a scandal. The archers looked at each other, doubt still lingering in their eyes. Finally, they lowered their heads and said, we were too agitated just now and have misunderstood Marshal. Please punish us, Marshal. The archers lowered their heads and looked at each other, noticing the glint of doubt in each other's eyes. They had seen it with their own eyes and heard it with their own ears. How could it be erased with just a few words? Yun Yang's short sentence had planted a seed in the hearts of the northern troops' soldiers. Was it true or not? Chapter 242. Yang Buitao sighed and said, all of you are hot-blooded, what crime have you committed? It's not just you. I've been hoping for the arrival of both Lord Supreme Wind and Flame just now. Even if both of them misunderstood me for some reason or even killed me, as long as both of them are still here, it's the Empire of Yutong's greatest blessing. The group sighed together. The incident in the residence of Yang had finally come to an end. The tornado that Yun Yang had turned into swept Fang Mafei along and disappeared instantly, the two silhouettes chasing after the tornado relentlessly. Yun Yang saw that the other party's abilities were profound and that he could not shake them off with just his wind manifestation. Without hesitation, he waved his hand. The two men felt a ball of fire coming towards them and hurriedly countered it with their palms. With their cultivation base, a wave of their hands was enough to extinguish the oncoming fire. However, both of them felt that something was amiss at the same time. The two balls of fire were too weak, dispersing upon contact. There was no room for resistance at all. Just as the two men were in doubt, they saw another ball of fire that was even more intense and wider than before. It burned fiercely and engulfed both of them in an instant. Both of them were shocked. Seeing the intensity of the fire, they dared not be careless. They first circulated their profound cultivation base to protect themselves and then worked together to sweep away the blazing fire. However, the intensity of the fire this time was still beyond their expectations. The range of the fire was vast, but it could not withstand a single blow. It was just that the range of the fire this time was too wide. When the two men rushed out of the fire, they realized that the tornado had already disappeared. Both of them were veterans in battle. They knew what was going on from the slightest clue and stopped immediately, activating their deific consciousness to search. Supreme Wind seemed to have left with his men, but both of them had only been distracted by the fire for a moment. Supreme Wind and the injured assassin would not have gone far, they must still be hiding nearby. As long as they searched carefully, they would definitely be caught. How could Yun Yang not know that the two pursuers were not easy to deal with? The trick just now could only distract the enemy for a moment, but what he wanted was a moment of buffer. He brought Fang Mafei into an abandoned house and simply bandaged his wounds before saying, "Stay here and don't move. Leave immediately when I lure them away. This is no problem for you, no need to say anything more." To an assassin, the ultimate assassination technique was secondary. Concealing one's tracks was the most powerful trump card. If Fang Mafei did not even have the means to conceal his tracks in the face of danger and not be discovered by his pursuers, then he was courting death and had nothing to do with anyone else. Before Fang Mafei could speak, Yun Yang had already turned into a gust of wind and disappeared into the horizon with a swoosh, trailing a black silhouette behind him. How could the pursuers let go of the man who was being carried away by the tornado? With a loud cry, they gave chase like a flash of lightning. To the both of them, it was not that they had not thought of the possibility that the person who had cast the wind manifestation skill had not escaped together with the injured. However, Fang Mafei was not even a threat to them. He was only an 8th peak cultivator, nothing to be afraid of. Instead, it was Supreme Wind who was in front of them that they had to eliminate. There was no time to lose. Seeing the shadow of death leaving swiftly, Fang Mafei was saddened. However, he did not slow down at all, moving swiftly and leaving his original spot. In the sky, a tornado swept forward like lightning, causing the clouds in the sky to scatter and scatter as it swept out of the city. By the time Yun Yang returned to the residence of Yun, it was already late in the night. He was exhausted, his legs felt like they were floating. He was utterly exhausted. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei had already returned home, even Fang Mafei's injuries had been tended to. Shui Wuyin was deep in thought facing a pile of items, occasionally scribbling and drawing with his brush. How was it? Yun Yang was truly exhausted. He sat down in front of Shui Wuyin the moment he returned home, but there was no sense of defeat in his expression. The attack this time was a complete success. Shui Wuyin looked satisfied, even elated, as he said, "Our current goal has basically been achieved." His words stunned Fang Mafei, who had been suppressing his injuries and refusing to go into closed-door recuperation right away, waiting for Yun Yang's return. Our two-pronged attack this time, Lao Mei had killed Han Wufei effortlessly and had indeed completed the mission. However, he himself had stepped right into the ambush and was almost beaten into a dead dog. If it weren't for Yun Yang's assistance, he would have become a dead dog. How could this coffin-faced man say that it was a complete success? Was this consolation or sarcasm? Could he be more straightforward? Yun Yang nodded. Not bad indeed. The target has been achieved. Fang Mafei could no longer hold it in and said, "Young master, we didn't kill Yang Butao. It's this subordinate's cultivation base that's not up to par. I've let young master down." Yun Yang smiled. "Old Fang, you don't have to blame yourself. Our attack to kill Yang Butao this time was only a pretense from the beginning to the end." A pretense? Fang Mafei was even more puzzled, not understanding what Yun Yang was referring to. Of course it's a pretense. I've never thought that you could kill Yang Butao alone. Yun Yang said, Yang Butao's background as a member of the Four Seasons Tower aside, his status in Yutong is equally respected. He's one of the 4 marshals of Yutong's military and the entire northern troop respects him. For such a person, even if the evidence is conclusive, we can't assassinate him in secret like this. Speaking of which, Han Wufei was an unexpected gain today. Yun Yang smiled. Lao Mei's visit this time was more of a test. If there was an ambush there, Lao Mei would have returned at once and wouldn't have taken the risk. However, I didn't expect them to focus all their ambush on Yang Butao's side and even put in deicide archers. They probably thought that Yang Butao would be safe with Supreme Lord Spring Frost's protection. Lao Mei said, "That's not bad." Han Wufei's side didn't have any decent guards at all. The entire killing process was so smooth that even I was puzzled. The moment I broke the door, I was prepared to run for my life. But when I felt it, there wasn't a single expert on the other side, only Han Wufei had some ability. When I had the upper hand, I was filled with disbelief and shock. Huh. Fang Mafei looked at Lao Mei begrudgingly. This fellow's luck was really good. Could it be that luck was better when one's ability was weaker? There were 3 objectives today. First, to alert the enemy, to get a glimpse of the other party's ability. Second, to reveal Supreme Wind's identity. Third, to send a signal to the Empire's higher-ups. Shui Wuyin said with satisfaction, "It looks like everything has been completed successfully and there's even an unexpected gain." Just like what Boss said, the additional deicide archers were an unnecessary addition. With the 500 archers by the side, the news of the 9 Supremes' reappearance can no longer be concealed. Next, Boss only needs to continue stirring up trouble. Yun Yang snorted. Stirring up trouble? What I want to do most now is to go on a killing spree like a whirlwind. As he spoke, Whitey 2 walked over gracefully with a meow, its tiny head rubbing against Yun Yang's calf. Whitey 2 did well in this battle. Lao Mei laughed and said, Han Wufei's head was bitten off by Whitey 2. Whitey 2 raised its head proudly and meowed. Yun Yang, who was carrying Whitey 2, felt a chill run down his spine. He tossed the creature to the ground and said with a frown, Whitey 2, you actually ate a human head. That's disgusting. Whitey 2 meowed pitifully. Lao Mei said, Whitey 2 didn't eat it, it threw it up again. However, 2 men went to Han Wufei's side and Whitey 2 laid in ambush. Each of them had a scratch mark on their calf. Yun Yang's eyes shone. Whitey 2, if you see those 2 men again, can you recognize them? Meow, Whitey 2 raised its head proudly and snorted. It looked proud and arrogant. I can recognize them even if they turn into ashes. That's great, that's great. Yun Yang guffawed. The advisor of the Crown Prince's residence was murdered. The northern marshal, Yang Butao, was assassinated. The 2 assassinations that had taken place in a single night had broken the peace of Tiantang City. When they heard that the northern marshal had been assassinated, the assassin had turned into a tornado and a raging inferno. This incident had shaken the entire Yutong's higher authorities. Everyone thought of supreme wind and flame at once. Especially when the assassin had left a message in the air. The message had been heard by everyone present. No matter how Yang Butao explained to his troops, it could not hide the gossip. The news had spread throughout Yutong's capital city overnight. Yang Butao, as an important general of the empire, did not think of serving the country but colluded with the enemy to frame my 9 Supreme's brothers. This is an unpardonable crime. The words were like thunder on a sunny day, shaking Yutong. Morning Assembly. When His Majesty the Emperor arrived, his expression was extremely grim, not bothering to conceal it at all. The 9 Heavens dictum had informed Xiao Jianhan that the advisor of the Crown Prince's residence, Han Wufei, had been confirmed to be from the 4 Seasons Tower and had been killed. This was supposed to be good news, but for His Majesty, there was suddenly an additional knot in his heart. The advisor of the Crown Prince's residence. The murder of Chu Tianlang earlier was related to the Crown Prince. This had already infuriated the Emperor. Now, there was Han Wufei, the main advisor of the Crown Prince's residence. How could this not make His Majesty even more worried? The anger in his heart immediately soared. Furthermore, there was He Hanqing. Even if he was an elder of 3 dynasties and the leader of Yutong's literary school, so what? After all, he was somehow related to the 4 Seasons Tower in every aspect. Ling Xiaozui's angry rebuke was the biggest proof. The empire of Yutong was plagued with internal and external threats. The emperor felt like a mountain was pressing down on his heart. Chapter 243. If it were not for His Majesty's health that had been nurtured by Yun Yang during this period of time, he would have been fine. His anger alone would have suffocated him for a long time, but now that his body was getting better, as long as he did not engage in a life-and-death battle, he could usually expect to live to a ripe old age, much less be frustrated. After all, His Majesty's cultivation base was rather high as well. It had not even been half a day since His Majesty's mood had gotten better, but the possibility of Yang Butao being a member of the 4 Seasons Tower had come to light. This sudden realization made His Majesty feel like 100,000 horses were galloping in his heart. He was the pillar of the military, one of the 4 marshals. Is the Grand Commandant here yet? His Majesty sat on the throne with a grim expression. Xiao Jianhan coughed and said, the Grand Commandant has been ill lately, but he'll be here today. It's just that the Grand Commandant's body is more sensitive to the cold during this season, so he might have to make some preparations before arriving. His Majesty nodded in understanding. Please wait then. Has the Grand Tutor arrived? This humble official is here. Have the marshals arrived? Your Majesty, this humble general is here. His Majesty snorted but did not speak, closing his eyes to rest. Not long after, a rough voice rang out, "This old official is ashamed to be late." His Majesty had just opened his eyes, but he closed them again. It was the Grand Commandant who had left, but it was Ling Daoyin, that old fellow. This old fellow was not ill, but he had come so late. Did he think this was his dining hall? Ling Daoyin was met with Qiu Jianhan's questioning gaze. Ling Daoyin rolled his eyes and sighed, pursing his lips. The corners of Qiu Jianhan's lips twitched. Glancing at Yang Butao discreetly, Ling Daoyin strode into the hall. Among the officials in the imperial court, Tai Zheng was the tallest. As he stood in the hall, he was 2 heads taller than the next taller person. He stood out like a crane amongst a flock of chickens, looking down on the crowd. No one else spoke, only Tai Zheng's eyes were glaring at Yang Butao without blinking, as if he was going to swallow Yang Butao alive. Yang Butao felt goosebumps rising from his glare and finally said angrily, "What are you looking at?" Tai Zheng grew angrier as he hollered, "So what if I'm looking at you?" Yang Butao was also furious. "Why don't you try looking again?" Tai Zheng lifted his neck and looked askance at Yang Butao. "I dare you to say that again?" Yang Butao only felt a belly full of anger. "Are you crazy?" Without further ado, Tai Zheng threw a punch at Yang Butao's face and cursed, "F***CKU. Your father doesn't just want to look at you, I want to hit you and kill you. What can you do about it?" Yang Butao's cultivation base was definitely not low, but no matter how hard he racked his brains, he would never have thought that Tai Zheng would actually dare to attack him in the Aurum throne room. He took the full brunt of the punch, seeing stars before his eyes. Enraged, he leapt up and scolded, "You with the surname Tai." Before he could finish his sentence, Tai Zheng's second punch had already landed precisely on the other eye socket. At the same time, a flying kick landed squarely on Yang Butao's lower abdomen. Yang Butao's equally burly body fell onto the throne room with a loud thud, sending dust flying everywhere. The few civil officials behind him dodged hastily. Their eyes flickered quickly. It was rare to see an internal conflict between the military generals today. Such a spectacle was too rare. Tai Zheng was unwilling to let it go, pouncing forward to press Yang Butao down and beat him up again. Yang Butao knew that Tai Zheng's ferocious nature had flared up. If he only attacked verbally and did not retaliate, this matter would be difficult to resolve. Yang Butao seized the opportunity and kicked Tai Zheng's lower abdomen. The kick caused Tai Zheng to grunt, but he grabbed Yang Butao's right leg, twisting his body to break it. Yang Butao roared and arched his body from the ground, wrapping his arms around Tai Zheng's neck. Both of them fell to the ground. In the next moment, the sounds of pow, 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 pow rang out continuously. Both of them were thick-skinned men. In an instant, the throne room was filled with dust. Qiu Jianjun and Ling Daoyin, the 2 old marshals, were exasperated, rushing forward to mediate the fight, but they had unintentionally restrained Yang Butao's limbs. Tai Zheng's hands were freed and punched again and again. After a few hits, Yang Butao's blood splattered everywhere. His Majesty the Emperor had only squinted his eyes when he heard the earth-shattering noises below him. When he opened his eyes, it had already turned into a martial arena. Droplets of blood splattered everywhere. It was a mess. Tai Zheng pinned Yang Butao to the ground and rode on him, punching and punching like a street thug, cursing with each punch, "F***ck your grandma. Bastard. I'll beat you to death. F***ck you. What is this?" His Majesty the Emperor was silent for a moment before he felt the world spinning around him. When he snapped out of it, he bellowed, "Stop it." Tai Zheng retracted his fist and retreated, spitting, "You bastard son of a b***tch got off easy. Why didn't I beat you to death?" Yang Butao broke free from his restraints and roared, springing up from the ground like a ferocious tiger, charging towards Tai Zheng in a frenzy. It was obvious that he had lost all sense of reason. Yang Buitao's military identity was no less inferior to Tai Zheng's. He had been utterly humiliated today, being held down and beaten up by Tai Zheng in front of all the civil and military officials of the imperial court. Stop it! His Majesty the Emperor was enraged. Yang Buitao. Didn't you hear me say stop? What kind of behavior is this? Yang Buitao's mind finally returned to a sliver of clarity as he looked at Tai Zheng, his face covered in blood. His finger stretched out, trembling, and pointed at Tai Zheng. Just you wait. Tai Zheng looked back at him with a similarly enraged expression. F***ck your grandpa, how dare you threaten me? Just you wait. If your father can't beat you to death today, I'll beat you to death tomorrow. Shut up, all of you. Are all of you trying to rebel? His Majesty the Emperor bellowed. The two marshals glared at each other before turning around and bowing. This official is guilty, Your Majesty, please be appeased. His Majesty the Emperor was panting with rage, almost fainting as he bellowed, what a disgrace. What a disgrace. Yang Buitao looked aggrieved. Your Majesty, this official has been wronged. This Tai Zheng has beaten this official like a mad dog today. This official has not offended him, Tai Zheng sneered, his laughter filled with disdain. His Majesty the Emperor said angrily, Tai Zheng, why did you resort to violence in the imperial court today? Tai Zheng said loudly, doesn't this bastard know what he has done? King hell. How dare he say he's being wronged? He's being wronged. He's insane. He's ungrateful. He's despicable. He's heartless. He's a bastard. Bah! Yang Buitao was enraged. Tai Zheng, speak clearly. Tai Zheng's muscular body took a step forward. You bastard, how dare you feign ignorance? Let me ask you, what happened last night? Yang Buitao's heart sank but he said, what do you mean last night? This marshal was assassinated last night and the assassin was being apprehended. Apprehended my *SS. Tai Zheng's white teeth were almost about to bite Yang Buitao's face. Supreme Wind and Supreme Flame went to your residence of Marshal and announced that you're the one who framed the 9 Supremes battle. What injustice do you have left to speak of? Yang Buitao defended himself loudly, nonsense. The assassins who attacked last night were obviously from Thunderclap Hall. They resented me for executing military law and killing their young lord, that's why they came to assassinate him. Tai Zheng, do you believe whatever the assassin says? Are you an idiot? Can't you use your brain a little? Supreme Flame's arcane art of fire is completely different from Thunderclap Hall's arson art. One is internal while the other is external, their nature is different. Anyone with eyes can tell. Tai Zheng pursed his lips in disdain and said, executing military law and killing Thunderclap Hall's young lord? What a selfless and strict Marshal Yang. Come, tell me, what's the name of the Thunderclap Hall's young lord who served in your army? What position did he hold? Why did he violate military law and was killed by you? Come, tell me everything. I'll investigate this Thunderclap Hall's young lord and see if he's really a person and guilty of a crime. Yang Buitao said angrily, it's been so long, who would remember such a trivial matter? If it wasn't for last night's incident, it's just a passing cloud. Whose hands haven't been stained with the blood of executing military law? Tai Zheng said angrily, do you think I've never led a troop? Don't King play dumb with me. The military law has always been specifically recorded. Did you King lead a bunch of mobs? Yang Buitao. You deserve to die 1,000 times over. Yang Buitao said, Tai Zheng, you're being so aggressive because you're jealous of my military merit, jealous that my position is higher than yours. I know you've been dissatisfied with me for a long time. As long as I'm around, your title as the unrivaled man of the younger generation in the military will be hard to live up to. Taizheng sneered. Unrivaled man of the younger generation in the military? Forget about the fact that I've never cared about this title. Even if I did, do you think you're fit to be mentioned in the same breath as me? Tell me, what other military merit have you achieved in these 2 years? Your father is in charge of the East and you're in charge of the North. Why would I be dissatisfied with you? You're not my king's son either. Your father is dissatisfied with you? Do you think you're worthy? You're a heartless thing. Even if you were to be my son, your father would despise you for sullying my name. Taizheng's rebuke was unstoppable. Although Yang Butao retaliated, his aura was much weaker. His Majesty wanted to stop him, but after some thought, he could only watch from the sidelines. Yang Butao suddenly turned to kneel. Your Majesty, please seek justice for this official. Taizheng's mouth is filled with filthy words and he has humiliated and slandered this official in front of the court. This official is innocent. Your Majesty, please seek justice. Taizheng roared and was about to charge forward to lash out again, but he was held back by Qiu Jianhan. Taizheng struggled with all his might, his eyes bloodshot and the panting in his chest could be heard clearly. This ungrateful thing. He was ambushed in the battle of the northern border back then. If it wasn't for the 9 Supremes who saved his worthless life, the grass on Yang Butao's grave would be 3 king feet tall by now. He actually participated in the murder of the 9 Supremes lords. Your father and I are irreconcilable. Chapter 244. Old Marshal Qiu hollered, Taizheng. Be careful with your words. Such a grave crime, such a grave one. Where is the proof for you to speak so casually? As he scolded, he hurriedly exchanged glances with Taizheng. Taizheng panted heavily, his veins bulging, but he finally calmed down. Gritting his teeth, he glared at Yang Butao, ready to bite him if he had the chance. Your Majesty, this old official, has come late. A panting voice came from the entrance of the hall. An old man with white hair and beard was hunched, coughing as he was helped in. It was the Empire of Yutong's military Grand Commandant, Fang Qingtian. However, this pillar of Yutong for so many years was now so old that he needed someone to support him even when he walked. On his face that was filled with age spots, there were scars all over it. They were the eternal mementos left behind by the old general's battle formation, a testament to the glory of the old general's battle formation. The one who helped old Grand Commandant Fang Qingtian in was the old Grand Commandant's assistant, his prized disciple, Fu Baogua, who supervised the board of war and held great authority. Bring a chair here. His Majesty ordered. Even when Fang Qingtian sat down, he was still panting, feeling uneasy. He said, This old official is ashamed that I can't bow and was instead bestowed a seat by your Majesty. I am extremely ashamed. His Majesty was moved as he said, Today's matter is of great importance. It's my fault for troubling old Grand Commandant to attend the meeting. My dear Minister, please don't blame yourself. May I ask your Majesty, why have you summoned this official here today? Fang Qingtian asked. His Majesty heaved a heavy sigh. The officials knew that this was the real climax of the day. All of them held their breaths in anticipation of what would happen next. Only Taizheng was still glaring at Yang Butao like he was looking at an irreconcilable enemy. Yang Butao dared to meet his gaze at first, but he had turned his head away later on. Sigh, too many things have happened recently, especially the ambush of the 9 Supremes. It can be said to be the death of the Empire of Yutong. His Majesty's first words were a heavy topic. Yang Butao's expression changed, a tinge of panic evident in his eyes. He clearly did not expect His Majesty the Emperor to bring this matter up so directly. He was greatly surprised. Before this, so many things have happened. I thought that after the Great Purge, most of the spies were gone. But now it seems that I was too optimistic, and now there are even more problems. His Majesty looked at Yang Buotao and said, "Last night, Yutong's northern troops marshal, Yang Buotao, was assassinated. The assassin said publicly that it was to avenge the 9 supremes. This is no trivial matter. All the civil and military officials in the imperial court were silent, deathly silent." The old Grand Commandant's wrinkled face slowly raised his eyes, which had long been covered by wrinkles, and glanced at Yang Buotao. This glance seemed calm and indifferent, but Yang Buotao broke out in a cold sweat. Although he was old, his ambition was still there, and his prestige did not diminish as it was in the past. "Yang Buotao, explain." Old Grand Commandant Fang Qingtian said faintly as he slowly closed his eyes. His entire body was like a rotten piece of wood, without the slightest bit of vitality. In spite of this, those who were familiar with him knew that the old Grand Commandant was using his lifetime's ultimate skill, ingenious volition. This was the old Grand Commandant's unique skill. There was rarely a record of it failing. The mystical aspect of this arcane skill was that it could listen to the slightest emotional fluctuation in the speaker's heart. In other words, any lies or falsehoods would be exposed before the old Grand Commandant's ingenious volition. Yang Buotao stood up, his head and face still stained with blood as he spoke in a hoarse voice filled with grief and indignation. "Last night, I was assassinated in my residence." The assassin did flaunt the name of the 9 Supremes Lords, but everyone present knew that it was only a ploy by a scoundrel. This official's first mission in the imperial court today was to ask your Majesty to uphold justice for this official, to remove this stain. Who would have thought? Yang Buotao said sadly, "I was beaten up by Marshal Tai Zheng indiscriminately the moment I came to the imperial court. A few of my colleagues pretended to stop the fight, but they were actually taking the opportunity to restrain me, allowing Tai Zheng to beat me up. When the old Grand Commandant arrived and His Majesty started the meeting, the first order of business was to ask me, Yang Buotao, to defend myself. I was first assassinated, then beaten up, then isolated, and now I'm asked to defend myself. I, Yang Buotao, have joined the army since I was young. I've been at the forefront of all battles. I've gone through over 700 battles, big and small, to achieve this position. Your Majesty's boundless grace, Yang Buotao worries day and night, afraid that I can't repay your grace. In the northern battlefield, I, Yang Buotao, fought day and night. My life and death were nothing to me. Although I didn't contribute to the country and couldn't expand our territory, I made sure that our land was not lost when facing the enemy's army. To this day, I'm covered in wounds, physically and mentally exhausted." Yang Buotao choked, his eyes glistening with tears. "I have nothing to say about my past contributions. However, today, His Majesty, the old Grand Commandant, my colleagues, the civil and military officials all think that I'm guilty, that the assassin's words are the truth. It's true that I, Yang Buotao, have murdered the 9 Supremes Lords. At this moment, in this situation, how can I, Yang Buotao, defend myself? There's really nothing I can say. However, I'm passionate and loyal. I've never felt guilty. I can't be slandered like this and not defend myself. I, Yang Buotao, have a clean reputation. I can't be humiliated like this. Since I can't be tolerated by the world, I can only die to prove my innocence. I hope that there'll be a day when the truth is clear." Yang Buotao's expression was fierce, his grief and indignation at its peak. With a sudden roar, he dashed to the door of the palace. With a clang, he snatched the sword of the guard on duty and swung it at his own neck without hesitation. "Yang Buotao shall serve your Majesty in my next life." With a shout, the sword was already at his neck. There was a sudden flash of a silhouette. Fu Baogua, who was beside the old Grand Commandant, flashed like a phantom and grabbed the blade of the sword, stopping it in its tracks. In spite of this, Yang Buotao's neck was already bleeding profusely. A deep bloody gash appeared on his neck. If it had been half an inch deeper, he would have lost his life, and there would have been no way to save him. It was not difficult to imagine the severity of Yang Buitao's act of suicide. Although Fu Baogua had stopped Yang Buitao's suicide by grabbing the blade of the sword, his right hand was already drenched in blood. He hollered angrily, "Everything is unclear now. I only asked you to defend yourself and you're seeking death. Yang Buitao, you've disappointed me." His right hand continued to exert force, snatching the sword back and flinging it away with a swoosh. The sword was stabbed into the ground outside the palace door with a clang, still swaying. The blade of the sword was cold, blood dripping slowly from the blade. The crowd of officials looked at the long sword swaying endlessly at the entrance of the hall. Everyone was silent. Yang Buitao's face was filled with grief and indignation. Suddenly, he wailed, his tears gushing like a fountain. "How can I, Yang Buitao, live in this world after enduring such humiliation? It's better to die and be clean." Fu Baogua heaved a long sigh and turned to kneel in the direction of the throne. "Your Majesty, there may be something fishy about this matter. It needs to be handled carefully. Even if Yang Buitao is really guilty, he needs to be tried fairly to uphold the imperial law. To force him in front of the palace like this, it goes against the law. Your Majesty, please reconsider." As Yang Buitao bled profusely, Fu Baogua pleaded with tears of blood. His Majesty was moved as well, but he did not say a word. Old Grand Commandant Fong Qingtian was still sitting steadily, not even his eyelids twitching. Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin stared at Yang Buitao with piercing gazes, their gazes icy, no different from before. Tai Zheng, on the other hand, snorted and mumbled, "Pretentious, disgusting." After a while, His Majesty frowned and said in a low voice, "This matter is related to the ambush of the 9 Supremes. It's more serious than the crime of treason. Old Marshal Qiu and Leng, the Grand Tutor, and the Prime Minister are ordered to investigate this matter. The Grand Commandant will be in charge of the coordination. This case must be investigated thoroughly. Don't let it go unjustly, don't let the souls of the dead rest in hatred. It's hard to distinguish right from wrong." The sudden change in the court meeting was extremely abrupt. The ministers did not even have time to react to the sudden internal strife in the military, and the civil officials did not say anything out of the ordinary. After all, to them, the military's infighting was a mess, killing each other. No matter who was defeated or defeated, the civil officials would be happy to see it. "This matter has been decided. You may leave now, my ministers. The Grand Commandant and Marshal Qiu and Marshal Leng shall stay and talk to me." After the imperial court meeting, Tai Zheng snorted coldly and was the first to leave without hesitation. As he walked, he cursed under his breath, "Disgusting. Trash. What a good act. F***ck, if you really want to die, why didn't you just sever your own heart meridians? Why didn't you just shatter your own skull? Why did you have to rush to the palace door to snatch the sword and then come back to commit suicide? What the hell? Do you really think everyone is blind?" The other 2 burly generals caught up to Tai Zheng with large strides. "Old Tai, it looks like you know about this matter. Tell us about it." "I'm in a hurry." Tai Zheng said furiously, "Are the both of you blind or deaf? Are you so stupid that you can't tell? Don't you understand? If you're really blind and deaf, would you be able to hear even if your father were to tell you? Your father doesn't have time for you 2 idiots." The 2 generals said angrily, "Tai Zheng, we've never offended you. Why are you venting your anger at us? We only want to know the truth. If you're willing to tell us, then tell us. If you're not, then forget it. You keep calling yourself your father. What are you pretending for?" Tai Zheng pretended not to hear them and continued to walk. His legs were long and the 2 generals behind him were indignant, catching up to him in a couple of strides and asking again. Only then did they hear Tai Zheng say angrily, "What else is there to say? The ambush of the 9 Supremes Lords is Yutong's heartache. With the 9 Supremes Lords' remarkable abilities, if it wasn't for the ambush and the betrayal of the traitor, how could all of them be in trouble? Now that Supreme Wind has appeared personally to testify against Yang Butao, he even wants to interrogate him. His Majesty is obviously senile and can't tell right from wrong. He even said that black and white are clear and justice is in the hearts of the people. Interrogation is unnecessary and will only disappoint the souls of the heroes. Before he could finish, his mouth was covered by the other general beside him. You bastard, do you really not want to live anymore? Don't King say it in front of us even if you don't want to live anymore. Chapter 245. Tai Zheng struggled to free himself and rebuked loudly, "It's because there are too many cowards like you that the murderer can get away scot-free. Things are already so clear, yet you're still pretending to be ignorant. Humph. Follow me to the residence of Northern Marshal if you have the guts." The 2 generals turned and left without another word. They dared not continue talking to this idiot anymore. If they did, they might really be dragged to the residence of Northern Marshal to fight for their lives. However, both of them were still whispering along the way. What Marshal Tai said isn't unreasonable. Who said he's unreasonable? Even if he's reasonable, he can't say it so clearly. After all, Yang Buitao's identity is there. So what if his identity is high? I've long felt that something was wrong with Yang Buitao. Forget it. Would you really dare to say this if it were today? Let's not talk about this. Say, is the Supreme Wind who appeared yesterday real or fake? I hope it's real. I still hope it's real. But if it's true, then Yang Buitao is finished. It doesn't matter if Yang Buitao is done for. As long as Lord Supreme Wind is still alive, Yang Buitao is nothing. Yes, if Lord Supreme Wind is still alive, perhaps Lord Supreme Flame is too. There's also Supreme Earth, Supreme Water and the rest, they might still be alive. Let's hope so. Yang Buitao returned to the residence with heavy footsteps. He felt the road ahead was a blur, his eyes filled with gloom. Right now, he could already faintly feel that his doomsday had arrived and was just around the corner. It was already in consideration of his years of hard work that the imperial court did not detain him. In fact, before the morning assembly, this feeling had already been lingering in his heart. It was just that he had been lucky enough to stun hundreds of deicide bow archers last night that he had made a few backup plans, hoping to be lucky. However, the reality before him had proven that the 9 Supremes were too important to the Empire of Yutong. A single word from them was enough to override the countless merits he had accumulated. This was a hopeless truth and reality. Summon. Discuss. Tai Zheng returned to the residence and gave the same order, summon. Assemble 50,000 troops immediately and set off to surround the residence of Northern Marshal once it's assembled. No one is allowed to enter or leave as long as it doesn't affect normal life. Pass down my order. Close the 4 gates of Tiantang City. Martial law will be enforced from today onwards. You can only enter, but not leave. Gather the experts in the army. All cultivators above 5th grade, stand by. Mobilize the deicide archers, target the Northern Marshal's residence. Anyone who tries to enter will be killed. Even a bird from the outside world is not allowed to enter. Tai Zheng's orders were passed down one by one. Commander-in-Chief, this, without His Majesty's Imperial Edict, and without the Tiger Tally, this, mobilizing the troops without authorization is a serious crime. Tai Zheng's advisor was filled with worry. Ever since he had followed this Eastern Troops Marshal, he had been shocked 3 times a day. Tai Zheng's audacity had reached a level that made one's hair stand on end. He didn't know when his temper flared up, but in the blink of an eye, he threw caution to the wind and exploded without any rational judgment. I'll bear all the consequences. All of you just do your job. Why are you so long-winded? Tai Zheng said fiercely. Sure enough, it was this sentence again. The advisor lamented in his heart. If it wasn't for His Majesty the Emperor's magnanimity, like Tai Zheng, he would have been beheaded and his possessions confiscated no less than 60 times over, no matter how great his meritorious service was, as long as the Emperor was so narrow-minded. All right, I'll arrange the manpower immediately. I'd rather commit the crime of deceiving the Emperor than let the person who murdered the 9 Supreme Lords get away scot-free. Tai Zheng hollered, send the order to the entire army, place the 9 Supreme Lords' altars. Once the battle begins, the rolling heads will be the offering. At the same time, the Western troops' military officers who were stationed in the capital city moved at the same time. Seal the city gates. Pay close attention to the movement. Deicide archers, get ready. Experts gather, get ready to move. The southern troop. Assemble, assemble. From now on, wartime regulations. Everyone, even if they're going to the toilet, must report beforehand. Even if someone dies in the family, they are not allowed to go home. Lock down the entire military camp, get ready to move. Deicide archers, get ready. Mystical steel arrows, 10 arrows in one bow, confirmed to be in position. The military camps around Tiantang City were filled with a murderous aura. The soldiers were brimming with murderous intent, their faces were cold and brimming with murderous intent. Portraits of the 9 Supremes were laid out and pasted on the walls respectfully. There were 2 big tables placed in front of the portraits, one of them was filled with fruits and offerings. The other table was only covered with a white cloth, there was nothing else on it, it was completely empty. It was prepared to be used to place the heads. Huge flags were suddenly erected in each military camp in an unusually ostentatious manner. Yutong's 9 Supremes, heroes are immortal. Every soldier who passed by the flags saluted spontaneously, their footsteps sonorous. The emotions of the countless soldiers were clearly surging. As they wiped their weapons silently, they pricked up their ears and listened attentively, paying attention to the slightest movement. They were afraid that they would be the slightest bit slower when the order to move was given. Every single one of them was like a taut bowstring. Once the order was given, they could leave the bowstring and shoot towards the target immediately. There were even more soldiers whose eyes were moist. It was not sadness, but agitation. 9 Supreme Lords, we can finally do something for you. Once the news is confirmed, we must avenge the 9 Supreme Lords even if we have to be cut into pieces. They had been holding this in for more than a year. Once it was vented, how could it be insignificant? The northern capital city's military camp was the opposite of the other military camps. At this moment, the northern army's camp was filled with chaos and noise as far as the eyes could see. Countless generals and officers were anxiously trying to suppress the inexplicable unrest that had suddenly arisen in the military camp. It was a pity that their pacification, conciliation, and forceful suppression were all futile. It was not that the effect was minimal, but it was completely ineffective. There were veterans who came to the tent's entrance with cold faces. General, is it true that the Marshal has plotted to murder the 9 Supreme Lords? General, is what happened last night true? Can't you give us a straightforward answer? Is it true or not? The generals were anxious but they knew that it was wrong to say it, so they could only try their best to pacify them. This matter is still under investigation. The joint action of the 3 military leaders has even alerted the old Grand Commandant. Just wait for the news. The military cannot be in chaos. All of you, go back and wait. Do you think we can hide the news from you? Do what you need to do. We'll inform you if there's news. I heard that Supreme Wind has appeared in the Marshal's house. Saying that the Marshal is the murderer, is this true? Go back quickly. You, I'm talking to you, go back quickly. Why are you so fierce? I'm asking if this is true. I'll ask even if you behead me. A veteran glared, his eyes bloodshot as he pressed a hand on the hilt of his saber. We've been brothers for so many years, stop putting on airs in front of me. I want the truth. Is it true? Is it true or not? Insolence. What kind of attitude is this? Do you still know who you are? Are you going to pull out your saber and interrogate me? The general roared. I just want to hear the truth. Why can't I hear the truth? The veteran straightened his neck, his veins bulging. Is it true or not? If it is, forget about me pulling out my saber at you, so what if I cut you down? Do you think I wouldn't dare? Motherf ****. Even if it's true, it's Marshal Yang's business alone. Do you think someone of my rank can handle such a huge matter? The general was already frustrated. Now, he was utterly exasperated. He blurted out without thinking. Does that mean it's true? The veteran's aura grew more dangerous. I didn't say that. You did say it. F***CKU. King said it. You said it. The veteran's eyes were burning with a murderous intent. I didn't say it. I didn't say anything. Go back, all of you. Go back quickly. Why are you surrounding your father here? Do you have any military discipline? Seeing that he could not pacify them or suppress them, the general decided to throw a tantrum. Your father is also waiting for news here. What's the use of surrounding your father? If it's true, your father will fight Yongbuotao to the death even if I have to rebel. Now, we still need to wait for more concrete news before everything can be set in stone. Can't all of you wait a little longer? Do you think you're the only ones who are anxious? Your father is going crazy from anxiety, do you know that? The northern troop was seething like a pot of boiling water. All of us in the northern troop owe the 9 Supremes Lords at least one life. If this is true, how can all of us in the Northern Army have the face to face our brothers from the other forces? Can you embarrass us to death? We'll die of shame if we're ashamed. People say that a clear conscience is the way to act. We can never be calm from now on. We have a guilty conscience. Is it true? Is it true? F***CKU. Your father is just asking a question. Why don't you King answer it, in front of the barracks? The soldiers who were on duty had their heads lowered, standing there as if they were pleading guilty. They were the unluckiest. Others could still hide in their tents where outsiders could not see them, but these few who were on duty were exposed to the eyes of the public. While the inside was in chaos, the entrance of the barracks was eerily silent like a ghost town. There were already countless troops from the east, west, and south that had departed from the 3 camps, the vanguard of their weapons directed at the northern troops' camp. Occasionally, there were generals and soldiers from other designations who brought their men to the entrance of the northern troops' barracks to take a few rounds. Their gazes were filled with disdain and hatred. A bearded general brought his men to the entrance of the northern troops' barracks on horseback and snorted loudly. The soldiers who were on duty in front of the barracks lowered their heads even more in shame. I've been having a fever these few days. Sometimes I don't update in time, please forgive me. Really, it's been 4 days and I've wanted to ask for leave almost every day, but I've resisted the urge. I'm not telling you to pretend to be pitiful or anything, but just don't be led by others and scold me along with the haters. Chapter 246. A bunch of ingrates. How dare they still have the face to stand in this world? Heaven is blind. The bearded man's voice was not soft, filled with disdain. Your father is actually a soldier with such trash my entire life. What a disgrace. The northern troop is really something. After so many years of war, they were the most useless, the ones who lost the most battles. The 9 Supremes went to help the most as well. In the end, it was these fellows who murdered the 9 Supremes, F***ck. It looks like they can even kill their own parents. There's nothing impossible about it, it's definitely possible. Come, let's go back. Await the order. Let's see if these fellows can still be arrogant after the evidence of their crimes is conclusive. If they still dare to be arrogant, your father will annihilate these bastards even if it means being beheaded. The bearded general finished his words and left with his men with a wave of his hand. Clip clop clop clop, a group of soldiers on duty lowered their heads, tears dripping onto the ground. They were so ashamed that they did not want to show their faces. Gradually, sobs could be heard. Outside, whispers could be heard among the troops. The 9 Supremes Lords' flags of revenge have been raised in our military base. Why hasn't it been raised here? Don't they care about the 9 Supremes Lords? Don't they want to avenge the Lords? That's the northern troop we're talking about. They're the ones who murdered the 9 Supremes Lords. Not to mention that they don't have the face to raise the flags, I'm guessing they don't even want to, at least they don't dare to. Pfft. It turns out that not only is Yang Butao a coward, even his subordinates are a bunch of cowards. They don't even dare to raise the 9 Supremes Lords' flags of revenge. I wonder if they're guilty or if that's what they think. F***ck, don't these people have the slightest bit of shame in them? Your father is going crazy from anger just thinking about it. The 9 Supremes Lords have saved the northern troop so many times. How can they be so heartless? They're not even human. Where does their conscience come from? It's been eaten by a F***king dog. Pfft, don't you dare insult a dog. How can a dog eat a black heart? Their hearts are all black. If we really fight, your father won't show mercy. I'll just take it as killing a dog. Me too. Me too. I told you not to trample on dogs. Dogs are the most loyal. How can they be compared to dogs? Exactly, exactly. In front of the barracks, all the soldiers lowered their heads and tilted their necks fiercely, squinting at their squad leader. Their gazes were fierce and overflowing with killing intent. Captain Zheng's eyes were red. He lowered his head and gritted his teeth. Wait here, I'll go ask. Go. We should have gone long ago. More than a dozen cries rang out at the same time. The captain wiped his tears, mounted his horse, and rode away with all his might. General. Why don't we raise the 9 Supremes Lords' revenge flag? Captain Zheng was on the verge of breaking down. He ran out of the tent and cried, our brothers from the other directions have already risen. Are we really that guilty? The general was taken aback. What flag of vengeance? It's a flag of revenge to seek justice for the 9 Supremes Lords. Why don't we raise it? Captain Zheng bawled, wiping his tears and snot all over his face. Your father has been a soldier for so many years, I'm used to seeing life and death on the battlefield. Your father has never cried in water or fire. But today, your father has had enough. Your father has been humiliated to this extent, yet I dare not make a sound. I wish I could die right now. When I heard that the 9 Supremes Lords were killed, your father cut my own face and swore a blood oath to avenge them. Now, the spearhead of the 9 Supremes Lords' murder is actually directed at us. Could it be that the rumors are true? Are we, the northern troop, really a bunch of ungrateful people? Murdering our saviors. How can our brothers still have the face to live? Captain Zheng was sobbing, his tears and snot running down his face. Flag of vengeance? The general's eyes were bloodshot as well. Send a few men to check on the situation. I'm not going. I'm not going. I'm not going either. One of the deputy generals was appointed. His face turned red as he roared, why should I go? Why don't you go? What face do you have to go out now? Even if your father stuffed my face into my pants, it's all gone. How can I have the face to go out and face the other brothers? The general's eyes were spitting fire. None of you want to go out? Then *ck off, your father. Your father will go out and have a look myself. The general urged his horse forward. It was only the time it took to drink a cup of tea before he came back again and again. His face was flushed, his eyes bloodshot as he roared, "Make flags for your father. Raise the flags. Set up the altar. Faster. We, the Northern Troop brothers, are not ungrateful people. We have no cowards. If Yang Butao really murdered the 9 Supreme's lords, the Northern Troop brothers will be the first to find him." The general bellowed. Once the command was given, the entire military base was in an uproar. The soldiers went back to make flags, their faces finally showing some signs of life. "Gather the men. Gather." The general bellowed again. Suddenly, a troop of men came over with a cold expression. "What? Jiang Chenglong, are you trying to rebel by gathering your men privately?" It was Yang Butao's most elite janissaries who had come over. The one who spoke was his janissary general. Jiang Chenglong looked over with bloodshot eyes and waved his hand. "Gather. Ignore them." The janissary general strode forward. "Jiang Chenglong, how dare you make the decision without the marshal's order? It's your business if you're not afraid of death, but it's not good if you implicate your brothers. How many lives do you have to pay for it?" The janissary was a quick-witted man. He knew that it was futile to suppress the situation and would only bring about the opposite effect. However, it might be effective if he shifted the threat to his subordinates. Jiang Chenglong's eyes glared as if they were about to burst into tears of blood as he said fiercely, "If Yang Butao is really related to the 9 Supreme's murder, then he's not fit to be our Northern Troops marshal. Your father will fight him with my life. So what if your father gave this assembly order on my own? At most, your father will pay with my life later and your father will definitely give this order. *CKU. The marshal is innocent. Didn't we explain everything clearly yesterday?" The janissary general roared. "If the marshal is innocent, when the truth comes to light, Jiang Chenglong, will tie my own hands and ask for my own death. Gathering military forces on my own merits, death awaits. The military law is merciless. But now, the Northern Troop must act according to my order." Jiang Chenglong roared, "As the deputy marshal, I have the authority to mobilize the troops. You're only the head of Yang Butao's janissary troops, what right do you have to ask your father what to do? Get out of the way, or else, I'll punish you according to military law right now." The janissary general's gaze turned to stare at Jiang Chenglong, his hand slowly pressing on the hilt of his saber. Jiang Chenglong did not move, his gaze equally fierce. In spite of this, everyone around Jiang Chenglong roared at the same time, unsheathing their sabers and swords as they looked at Yang Butao's Qin soldiers like hungry wolves. Only a glance or a movement was needed, and it would be a huge battle. "Get back!" Jiang Chenglong hollered, "Do you really want to do this?" The janissary captain sucked in a deep breath and pointed a finger at Jiang Chenglong. "Just you wait." He turned to lead his men back. "Now, do as I say." Immediately. Immediately. Jiang Chenglong's expression was steely. The janissary captain returned to his own tent with a heavy expression, only to find that an altar had been erected outside his tent. The portraits of the 9 Supremes had been placed there. The captain's gaze wavered. The janissary soldiers around him evaded his gaze, some were panting, everyone seemed to have a bellyful of things to say. "Captain, is it true?" Finally, a man asked in a trembling voice. "I believe in the marshal. He would never do such a thing. It's all the lies of spies, they're distorting the truth." The captain said through gritted teeth. "What if it's really the marshal's doing?" Another man asked. The captain's facial muscles twitched. He did not speak for a moment. He stood straight, looking at the portraits of the 9 Supremes. Suddenly, he knelt down. All the Janissary soldiers' faces darkened. As the Marshal's Janissary soldiers, we're always at the forefront in every battle. Every time we lose, it's also when we're the most desperate and in the most dangerous situation. Therefore, every time the 9 Supremes Lords make a move, it's equivalent to saving everyone. But we're the Marshal's Janissary soldiers. If this is true, the entire Northern Troop can say that it's the Marshal's doing alone, it has nothing to do with the Northern Troop. Only we can't say that. No one will believe us even if we say it. We're the Marshal's Janissary soldiers. We're the Marshal's most trusted and closest people. We are indebted to the 9 Supremes Lords for saving our lives countless times, but we are also indebted to the Marshal. The captain closed his eyes and said quietly, if it's true, his voice suddenly choked. If it's true, no matter which side we're on now, how can we live after this? As his words trailed off, the surroundings fell into silence. In the palace, Grand Commandant Fong Qingtian reclined on his chair, panting laboriously. His Majesty sat on the big chair in the royal study, quietly waiting for the results. Xiao Jianhan and Leng Daoyin stared at the old Grand Commandant with widened eyes. After a long time, Fong Qingtian opened his eyes and said, what Yang Butao said was a lie. Moreover, he seemed to have prepared it a long time ago. So, there must be something wrong with Yang Butao in this matter. His Majesty nodded calmly and said, with the old Grand Commandant's testimony, the truth is clear. However, Yang Butao's betrayal has become a trivial matter. The real crux should be, the tornado that appeared last night, was it Supreme Wind himself? And the one who attacked with fire, was it Supreme Flame? Chapter 247. Xiao Jianhan said, from what I see, this is most likely true. There's indeed something wrong with the flame, but Supreme Wind can basically confirm it. It's just that it's hard to say if he's willing to show himself. Old Grand Commandant Fong Qingtian coughed and said, Your Majesty, please don't let your guard down. Although my ingenious providence can tell that Yang Butao is suspicious, it's not as obvious as it used to be. It's not hard to deduce that Yang Butao might have other tricks up his sleeves. His true ability is most probably not as simple as what we've seen. Besides, he's still one of Yutong's 4 marshals. His Majesty frowned and said, that's right. I was too naive just now. Putting aside the possibility that Yang Butao might have hidden his true strength, this matter has been pushed to the forefront now. It's impossible to take down Yang Butao, an important military general, one of Yutong's 4 marshals, with mere groundless evidence. It's not something that I can do alone. However, if Supreme Wind really reappears, as long as Supreme Wind is determined to capture Yang Butao, he'll definitely appear to verify this matter. As long as Supreme Wind appears and proves his identity, Yang Butao won't need to be interrogated at all. He'll be convicted directly and the soldiers under his command won't defend him. However, if Supreme Wind doesn't appear, this matter, His Majesty pondered. Old Marshal Xiao Jianhan said, it's inevitable that Supreme Wind will appear. However, what we need to worry about now is actually the same as Supreme Wind's concern. Once Supreme Wind appears, what can we do to ensure his safety? Difficult. Old Grand Commandant Fong Qingtian coughed and covered his mouth with his hand. Leng Daoyin passed him a handkerchief swiftly. Fong Qingtian spat out a mouthful of phlegm, his breath finally smoothing out. He said, difficult. As long as Supreme Wind doesn't appear, he can do whatever he wants in this world. However, if his whereabouts are exposed, he'll definitely become the target of all his enemies. Back then, the 9 Supremes were still about to perish under the heavy ambush. Now that there's only Supreme Wind by himself, even with Supreme Flame's help, the situation is still not optimistic. After all, the enemies they have to face include enemy countries and the martial world. There are even many spies in this dynasty, old Grand Commandant panted and said, it's impossible to guard against. If Supreme Wind appears, he can kill Yang Buotao, but the price is too high. The loss outweighs the gain. Old Grand Commandant coughed violently and said, this old official knows your Majesty's intention. He wants to meet Supreme Wind and ease his mind. However, using such a method to force Supreme Wind out, the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. It's not worth it. In my opinion, why don't we just cut the chase and kill Yang Buotao's family? The old Grand Commandant coughed a few times and said, in this way, Supreme Wind doesn't have to show himself. His Majesty's arbitrary actions are undesirable, but it's not that he can't or shouldn't do so. If we can be sure, Yang Buotao's death will be fine, but if we can't be sure, be it me or the military, we can't get rid of the stigma of killing a good man. The price will be equally huge. Grand Commandant, using the exquisite jade heart to prove that Yang Buotao is unusual, we can believe it, but it can't be used as proof. If we really do so, the outside world will only say that an unknown assassin in black turned into a gust of wind and made us kill a country's marshal with a single sentence. His Majesty smiled bitterly. There are many follow-up issues. If we don't handle it well, it might lead to another Zhuo-Wenlong incident. Furthermore, the military of the other countries will probably make a big deal out of this, breaking down Yutong's military morale bit by bit. Old Grand Commandant frowned, speechless. His Majesty's considerations were reasonable. Acting rashly without any proof would not be able to hide the world's gossip. The Empire of Yutong was the world's public enemy. Once there was an opportunity to attack, the other countries would not let it go easily. Supreme Wind's reappearance this time is targeted at Yang Buotao. I believe he has the intention to bring Yang Buotao to justice. As long as he doesn't reveal his real face and identity, there won't be too much trouble. Leng Daoyin said, the only thing that needs to be resolved is probably the aftermath of Supreme Wind's reappearance. Breaking away from the tracking of those with ulterior motives is the key now. I can basically confirm that if there's something fishy going on with Yang Buotao, the reason why the people behind him did not provide more support to help him get out of his predicament is probably because they're waiting for Supreme Wind to show up and use this opportunity to understand Supreme Wind's real identity. Leng Daoyin said, since they're waiting, they must have the means to track him down. They might even have the confidence to stop Supreme Wind from turning into a gust of wind. Just like what Old Leng said, this is the most troublesome problem. The mysterious arcane skills that these people of Shanhai possess are really not something that we can speculate about now. Xiao Jianhan sighed deeply. How's the current reaction in the military camp? His Majesty asked. The military camp is boiling. It's almost out of control. Leng Daoyin chuckled humorlessly. Actually, it's not just the military camp. The entire Tiantang city is boiling. His Majesty pondered and said, this matter needs to be settled as soon as possible. Let's hold a public trial for Yang Buotao in Tiantang Square, in front of the Monument of Brave Souls. The rest of the people's eyes shone brightly. Brilliant plan. Xiao Jianhan. His Majesty said, you'll be in charge of arranging this. If Supreme Wind appears, it must be done without any mistakes. Yes. If there's any mistake in this public trial, this old official will bring my head to see you. Xiao Jianhan strode out. Leng Daoyin reminded him from behind, don't forget the 20 to 30 experts who suddenly appeared in Yang Buotao's residence when the assassins tried to assassinate him. Xiao Jianhan was nowhere to be seen. He only threw back a question, do you think I'm like you? Leng Daoyin rolled his eyes, choking on his words. The entire Tiantang city had suddenly turned into an ocean of hatred on this day. Avenge the 9 Supreme's lords. Such flags could be seen everywhere. It was the same in the military camp and among the people. Everyone's expression was somber and sorrowful. The place where Yang Butao lived was taken over and sealed off. Every house on the street where the residence was shut down. Only Yang Butao's family was not allowed to close their doors day and night. Other than the soldiers who came and went, there was no one else to be seen on the street. Occasionally, there would be people who passed by the end of the street from afar. They would cast a glance at the place with disgust and disdain before turning to leave. The hundreds of people in the residence of Yang still had to make a living. Although there were still food reserves in the house, they still had to purchase vegetables and meat. The military would not interfere when the people of the residence of Yang came out to purchase. The steward who was in charge of purchasing walked hurriedly with his head lowered. He had always been in charge of purchasing ingredients, so he was already very familiar with the vendors in the market. Right now, all he wanted to do was buy the ingredients as soon as possible and hide in his room. However, when he arrived at the market, the steward was shocked to realize that everything was different from before. Everyone was looking at him with resentment, like they were looking at the enemy who had killed their parents. The steward had only walked a dozen steps into the market, but he was already enveloped by a strange atmosphere. It was as if he had walked into a wolf's den with his bare hands and no strength to truss a chicken. Everyone was looking at him with an ominous glint in their eyes. Those who were originally trying their best to curry favor with him and hoping to help him were all different today. Not only did they not come over to talk to him, they even looked like they wanted to beat him up. What was even more outrageous was that he could not buy any vegetables with the money he had. Not selling. Oh, you're asking about this? This is not for sale. Why are you setting up a stall if you're not selling? Yes, I set up a stall to look like I have something to do. In fact, I'm waiting to watch the show. If the vegetables are sold out, I'll have to go back. What show is there to watch? What show? Is it worth looking forward to? Someone is going to die soon, and it's going to be a horrible death. I heard it's a martial. How can I not watch such a show? There was no way to chat anymore. It was better to go to another stall. How much are you selling these vegetables? Not for sale. Why? Because I'm happy. Happy? What a strong reason. The manager had no choice but to go to another stall. How much are you selling these vegetables? Not for sale. Why? I'm not happy. Not happy? It was the same strong reason. It was fine if he was happy and not selling, but why would he not sell even if he was unhappy? The steward wanted to question him, but he forced himself to hold back. If he asked, he might be beaten up. Normally, he wouldn't be afraid, but this time, forget it, he would go to another place. Your vegetables, I'm not selling them. If I sell them to you, what will I feed the pigs with when I go home? Your vegetables, this is for people to eat. It's not suitable for you to eat. Similar answers were given, each more ferocious than the last, and each more directed than the last. The steward patiently asked around and finally found someone who couldn't resist the temptation of the shining silver and wanted to make a deal. However, just as he was about to reach out to take the silver, he discovered that everyone in the market was staring at his hand with their eyes wide open. Countless eyes were focused on him. Some were looking at him with contempt, some were disdainful, some were angry that he did not want to compete, and there were even more who were furious. The man's hand suddenly retracted as if it was scalded by fire. From the eyes of those people, he could see that as long as he sold a vegetable to the Yang family today, he would not be able to establish a foothold in this place for the rest of his life. He could not help but laugh dryly and retract his hand, saying, "I forgot, my vegetables today, they are not delicious." The manager saw that he had succeeded, but why did this guy change his mind? He immediately became anxious. How is it not delicious? Isn't it the same as before? I'm mainly afraid that you will mind. The man laughed dryly. Today, I peed in the vegetables. Cough, my son also defecated on it. If you don't mind. Chapter 248. Ugh! The steward almost vomited. Wash it twice more. Fine. F***CKU. If it had been in the past, he would have slapped the person who dared to speak to him like this, but now, he really did not dare. Even if he were to vomit to death, he dared not do it in front of him. In short, the steward had been to 3 markets but he did not manage to buy a single stalk of vegetables. He returned empty-handed, but it was not as easy as when he had come. There was a sentry every few steps he took. Before he had even taken a few steps, the steward had already been searched everywhere on his body, not letting go of any hidden spots. After this round of searching, he would be met with another wave of searches every few steps he took. Again, all the hidden spots on his body were searched. They wanted to see if there was any news. What if the search was not thorough and they missed it? Those hidden spots were the main targets of the search, they could not be let go. By the time the steward returned to the residence of Yang, it was already the 4th hour of the night. The search along the way had almost cost him half his life. Even the gaps of his nails had been searched, where else could he not find? There was also that, a broken anus, a body full of wounds. It was not fake at all. In the inner yard of the residence of Yang Butao looked as calm as ever on the surface, but in reality, his heart was in a state of turmoil, and he couldn't calm down in the slightest. Surrounding him were the Four Seasons Tower's experts who had used various identities to sneak in. There were more than 20 of them. However, even though there were many people, it was peaceful and calm. To these people, the matter before them was only a trivial matter. Whether they succeeded or failed, it was insignificant. However, the significance of the current matter to Yang Butao was very different. Yang Butao, as a Yutong's man, had been born and raised in Yutong, built a family, built a career, and built a meritorious service. It had not been easy for him to come this far. It had only been a few days, but Yang Butao had suddenly realized that what he had painstakingly built and fought for his entire life was about to be destroyed. The source of all this was because he had thought that he had done it carefully, a secret that no one would ever know about. His current feelings were indescribable and indescribable. Looking at the indifferent faces of the Four Seasons Tower's experts around him, Yang Butao was exasperated. Of course, you don't have to care. You can just leave this place and return to the martial world. The 4 corners of the world are your home. Anyway, you've gotten used to such a life. But me? Does anyone spare a thought for me? Marshal, Madam invites you. A pretty little maid walked over timidly. Yang Butao coughed and said, "Did Madam say what happened? I still have important matters to attend to. If there's nothing important, we'll talk later." For some reason, at this moment, Yang Butao suddenly felt flustered and afraid to face the person who he had slept with for several decades. He was clearly bored to death, but he didn't dare to say it out loud, and he didn't dare to face her. Madam seems to have something important to discuss with Marshal. "Marshal, please come over as soon as possible," the little maid said. "Tell Madam that I'll be there soon." Yang Butao paced back and forth, muttering to himself for a long while. Finally, he sighed and said, "Everyone, please wait here for a moment. I'll be right back." A green-robed old man who was the leader said with a smile, "Marshal, please do as you please." Yang Butao nodded and strode away. "Madam is looking for me?" Yang Butao followed her into the bedroom. This was the most private space in the entire Yang mansion. Usually, the only people who could enter this room were the husband, wife, and a personal maid who was in charge of cleaning and tidying the room. But now, in this private space, there was a small table in front of the bed. There were 4 dishes, a pot of wine, 2 wine cups, and 2 sets of chopsticks on it. I don't know why, but I'm suddenly in the mood to have a drink with my husband tonight. Yang Butao's wife was the daughter of an official. Although she was already in her 40s, she still had a slim figure and was as beautiful as a flower. For Yang Butao to have such a wife made others envious. It could be said to be a trivial matter and a topic of conversation. I didn't expect Madam to have such a refined interest. I'll have a drink with Madam. Yang Butao laughed heartily and seemed to be in high spirits. He sat down and smelled the aroma of the dishes. His face was intoxicated. Madam's dishes are getting better and better. Eat more if you think it's good. Madame Yang sat opposite and raised her wine cup. She looked at Yang Butao lovingly. My husband, please. Madam, please. Yang Butao laughed heartily and drank the wine in his cup. He looked very cheerful and carefree, much more relaxed than his usual dignified appearance. However, he had completely concealed all of his negative emotions. Madame Yang covered her face with her sleeves and drank the wine in her cup slowly. As she drank, her eyes stared at Yang Butao's face without blinking. Why are you looking at me like that? Yang Butao smiled. Do you think I'm old? Madame Yang smiled gently. My husband is in his prime, how can you say that? But I looked at the moon last night and suddenly remembered that it has been 27 years since I married into the Yang family. Yang Butao sighed unnoticeably. 27 years, so it has been that long. Since ancient times, beauties were like famous generals, they were not allowed to see their hair turn white. Be it beauties or famous generals, the merciless years were their biggest enemies that they could not fight against. This time, Madame Yang looked out of the window and said slowly, it doesn't seem to be easy. Yang Butao shuddered and said, don't worry, madam. This incident is just a misunderstanding. Once everything is cleared up, everything will be settled and everything will return to normal. You don't have to worry about it. Madame Yang turned around slowly and looked at Yang Butao's face gently, trying to catch his gaze. However, Yang Butao's gaze only met hers once before he looked away and raised his wine cup for the second time. I know it's true. Madame Yang said, you and I have slept together for so many years, I know your habits. You will look away the moment you feel guilty. Especially when you're facing me. Yang Butao remained silent and did not reply for a long time. Since the year before last, your temper has been weird and getting worse. You would always go out for a walk alone in the middle of the night, Madame Yang said, I knew then that something was wrong with you. Last year, when the 9 Supremes Lords were ambushed, you became more and more abnormal. Initially, I thought you were worried because of the 9 Supremes Lords' unfortunate demise and Yutong's fortune. However, when you personally killed the old dog that you had reared for more than a decade, I vaguely felt that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Later on, you would often wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. It only showed your abnormality. Madame Yang said quietly, I know something is wrong with you but I won't ask if you don't want to talk about it. You're a man, you should have some space for yourself. I believe you won't hide anything from me if you can tell me. Previously, I was still naively fantasizing that you would definitely be able to tide through it on your own and adjust yourself very quickly. Mistress Yang smiled sadly. That's why I've been waiting all this while, waiting for you to tide through it and then tell me about this journey of yours. I didn't expect that I would wait for this day and that what I've waited for is such a terrifying news. Is my sky going to fall? Madame Yang shook her head and sighed. Husband, why is this so? Tell me, I want to know. Yang Butao sat like a statue, motionless and silent for a long time. Since Madame Yang began to speak, he had not moved. However, his face grew paler and paler. When he heard the question, Yang Butao shuddered involuntarily. Husband is a native of Yutong, the blood of Yutong flows in your veins. Since enlisting in the military, you've been on the battlefield for a long time, you've been through hundreds of battles. All the way until now, you're already second only to one and above tens of thousands of people. You can be said to be at the pinnacle of being a vassal. On the battlefield, you're the marshal of an army. With one command, millions of soldiers can die without regret. Madame Yang's voice was calm. I know how much you've suffered for the Empire of Yutong, how much you've suffered. There are a total of 135 scars on your body. For so many years, he has done his best to protect the country and fought on the battlefield. He has never fallen behind. My husband is a good man of steel. A loyal vassal of the Empire of Yutong. I'm absolutely sure of this. But it's also because of this that I'm even more puzzled. Since my husband is such a hero who deserves to leave his name in history, why would he do such a thing? Madame Yang's voice had been calm. When she finished her last sentence, she lifted her head slowly, her clear eyes looking at Yang Butao without blinking. She said slowly, "Why would you plot against the 9 Supremes? Tell me." When she said the last 3 words, Madame Yang's tone that had always been flat turned into a high-pitched one. Cold sweat broke out on Yang Butao's forehead. Tell me, 2.5 years ago, every time we talked about military affairs, you would always talk about the 9 Supremes. From the beginning, it was those little fellows, but slowly, it became the 9 Supremes lords. It was all an indication of your great recognition of the 9 Supremes lords. Speaking of the 9 Supremes, you were eloquent and long-winded back then, especially that time when you fell into an ambush and the 9 Supremes appeared to save you, saving the army from defeat. You promised solemnly that as long as you were alive, it would be the time to repay them. Madame Yang said, but I don't know when it started, but you stopped talking about the 9 Supremes. You didn't talk about anything else at the dining table either. As time went by, you haven't heard the 2 words 9 Supremes from your mouth for 2 years. The muscles on Yang Butao's face twitched and spasmed, sweat dripping from his body. His expression grew paler, almost drained of color. Chapter 249. Madame Yang replied calmly, half a year ago, I had already arranged for my youngest son, Yang Qin, to go to his maternal grandfather's house. You've even asked why he hasn't returned yet. 1,000 miles is not considered far. I can answer my husband's question now. Qin won't be coming back. He didn't go to his maternal grandfather's house. Instead, he entered a sect and became a disciple of a sect. This is my arrangement. At that time, I was afraid that you wouldn't agree, so I didn't tell you the truth. I only hoped that one day, when Qin's cultivation was successful, he would come back and tell you everything. Now, it seems, everything was a lucky hit, and your Yang family has left behind a little bloodline. As the daughter-in-law of the Yang family, this is also something that I have done for your family. Phew, Yang Butao let out a long sigh, as if he had put down a huge stone in his heart. He said gratefully, "Thank you, my good wife." Mistress Yang looked at Yang Butao and said, "Even now, you still don't want to tell me the reason?" Yang Butao took a deep breath, as if he wanted to say something, but he swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He said, "Madam doesn't need to know about this. Just take it that I..." Yang Butao's heart was suddenly blinded by lard and possessed by a ghost. His eyes were filled with anguish as he said, "I, Yang Butao, have let down the 9 Supremes first in my life, letting down you, my wife, is the second." He stood up and stared at his wife. Suddenly, he knelt down and said, "My wife, I'm sorry." The tears that Mrs. Yang was trying her best to hold back finally flowed out. Even at this point, he still refused to speak. Yang Butao slowly stood up and walked out without looking back. Yang Butao knew that there was no turning back for him. There was no turning back for him since a long time ago. Mistress Yang's tears streamed down her cheeks. After a long, long time, she said, "Forget it. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. If I say it, I'll die too. If I don't, I'll still die." There's nothing wrong with being a muddle-headed ghost. There's no need for humans to understand everything. She picked up a cup of wine and slowly drank it. She murmured, I wanted to poison this wine and end it all, but, in the end, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Forget it. On the day of the public trial, let's go to the underworld together. The night was dark, and the wind was howling in the horizon. The wind seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. The cold wind whistled through the air, stirring up a sharp sound. It was as if thousands of ghosts were coming out at the same time, causing one's scalp to explode involuntarily. Countless people in Tiantang City were waiting for daybreak. When the sun rises, the truth will be revealed. Tai Zheng was an exception. He had gone to bed early, snoring loudly as he slept soundly like a dead pig. However, when the fourth night watch had passed, he woke up abruptly, scaring his wife who was beside him. Why so early? Something big happened today. Recover your energy and wake up early to prepare. Tai Zheng's upper body was bare as he sprung up. The cold wind blew on his bare chest and on his face. He shuddered, the remaining drowsiness vanishing without a trace. Tai Zheng used the cold well water to wash his face and put on his robes swiftly. After wiping his face carelessly, he said, Mistress, I am going to work. Without waiting for his wife's reply, he strode out. His wife, who was draped in a robe, leaned against the door. She vaguely felt that Tai Zheng was not quite himself today. It was only a court session as usual. Was there a need to be so valiant, as if he was about to fight a decisive battle? Yes, court session. However, Tai Zheng had a sword at his waist, a breastplate hanging on his chest, he was clad in armor, and his bodyguard behind him was helping him carry the glaive. How was this a court session? It was obviously a fight to the death. Just as she thought about it, she could not help covering her mouth in shock. Just as she was about to chase after him to ask, she realized that Tai Zheng had already disappeared around the corner. He was gone. At this moment, Tiantang Square was already crowded with people. A towering flag stood in the center. This flag was at least 200 feet tall, and the blood-red flag was fluttering in the air. Below the flag, there was a high platform. This platform was the main venue for the public trial. However, the public trial this time, all the higher-ups knew that this so-called public trial was only a pretense. Whether it was Yutong's higher-ups or the Four Seasons Tower's side, they were all waiting for one person to show up. Whether the crime was proven or not, it did not depend on the evidence, but whether the person showed up or not. If Supreme Wind showed up, then Yang Butao would be guilty, and unpardonable. If Supreme Wind did not show up, then Yang Butao would be innocent. All his crimes would be cleared and he would be safe and sound. Other witnesses and material evidence would not count. The sun was high up in the sky, its rays shining on the earth. The 5 main judges had all arrived. Yang Butao, who was directly involved in the case, had also arrived to await his trial. Yang Butao did not bring many people with him, there were less than 30 of them. They were all dressed in military uniforms, but the aura they exuded was enough to make Qiu Jianhan and the other bigwigs take a few more glances. This group of people had a domineering aura that was completely different from that of the military. It was clear to everyone that this group of people was not simple, they were not to be underestimated. Old Marshal Qiu snorted and said, Marshal Yang, there are quite a number of experts among your bodyguards. Even this old man doesn't know if I should be envious or jealous when I see them. Yang Butao's face was pale, looking rather absent-minded. He only hummed in response to old Marshal Qiu's harsh words, as if he did not hear what he said clearly. He did not offer any explanation or rebuttal. His back that had been as straight as a pine tree was obviously hunched. Tai Zheng had been paying attention to Yang Butao's every movement and word since the moment he had arrived. His heart skipped a beat, it had only been one night, but Yang Butao seemed to have aged 20 years in an instant. Had there been some other unforeseen event? When Tai Zheng heard old Xiu's sarcastic words that sounded like praise but were actually derogatory, he paid even more attention to Yang Buto's actions. He had thought that the latter would defend himself endlessly, such as how he had been a marshal all his life, loyal and courageous, receiving the help of many righteous men. There was nothing strange about it. If Yang Butao had said so, Tai Zheng would definitely have rushed over. Even if he did not fight, he would have spat on his face. However, Yang Butao's actions were too unusual. Tai Zheng did not know what to do, so he sat down quietly. It was not only old Marshal Qiu and Tai Zheng who were paying attention to Yang Butao, but everyone else who was present had their gazes focused on him. Facing the sword-like gazes from all directions, Yang Butao lowered his eyelids. He did not speak nor move, his expression dull like a wooden sculpture. Among the group of people who had followed him here, there were two people who had always stood behind him, while the others had quietly dispersing into the crowd without leaving a trace. They seemed to be moving casually, but in reality, they had faintly formed an encirclement. It was a large circle. Yang Butao sat there with his eyes closed, his expression as dark as still water. He was shocked by a sentence that he had been thinking about for a long time: why? It was his wife, a question that was filled with doubt and incomprehension. Why? Yang Butao was also asking the same question in his heart. However, there was only a bitter smile on his face. He had nothing to say to it, he had no heart to answer. He had come out today only to wait for this result. If Supreme Wind were to appear, it would be the final verdict. No matter how he refuted it, no matter how perfect the evidence was, it would be futile. If Supreme Wind did not appear, if he did not appear, Yang Butao could not think of any reason why Supreme Wind would not appear. The 9 Supremes had never needed so many taboos in their actions. There was only what they should and should not do. In the past, Yutong's wars had been fraught with danger. There were countless battles where the situation was precarious. However, no matter how dangerous the war was, as long as they could make it in time, the 9 Supremes would definitely come to their aid. They had never cared about the so-called danger, only whether they should or should not do it. Actually, even if Supreme Wind did not come, what could he change? His act of treason and collusion with the enemy had long been settled in the hearts of Yutong's higher-ups. Whether Supreme Wind would appear or not, parting with his wife this morning would be a farewell forever. His wife would not wait for him to return. Thinking of this, Yang Butao felt a throbbing pain in his heart. The high platform was surrounded by fully armed soldiers who were guarding the stability of the platform. Further out, there were troops who stood solemnly, forming the second line of defense. Then, there were the ordinary citizens who came to watch. However, the number of people who came to watch today was unusually large. It was a sea of people, with no end in sight. Everyone present was waiting. In the palace, His Majesty the Emperor was waiting. In the residence of Grand Commandant, Old Grand Commandant was waiting. In the sky, there were other existences who were waiting as well. Yang Butao and his guards and experts were waiting as well. By His Majesty the Emperor's order, a public hearing will be held here regarding the case of Supreme Wind, one of the 9 Supremes, accusing Yutong's northern troop marshal, Yang Butao, of colluding with the enemy in framing. Leng Daoyin's voice was like the clanging of metal. This concerns the fate of the nation. The world must bear witness. Do not let injustice go unpunished, do not let the souls of the heroes rest in their graves, lead, Yang Butao. Leng Daoyin hollered. Yang Butao stood up slowly, the corners of his lips curled into a smile that no one knew what it meant as he strode up to the stage. Only Yang Butao stood up on the high platform. There was nothing in front of him, only emptiness. Everyone was waiting. If Supreme Wind were to appear to testify, then this should be the moment. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that this was a setup. It was not targeted at Yangbuotao, but at Supreme Wind, or perhaps the surviving members of the 9 Supremes. If Supreme Wind were to appear, then Yangbuotao would have to die. There was no room for negotiation. However, Supreme Wind would have to bear a great crisis. Other than Yutong, the whole world viewed the 9 Supremes as the root of the world's calamity, eager to get rid of them. If Supreme Wind did not appear, then the public hearing against Yangbuotao would change. There would be countless pieces of evidence to prove that he was wrongly accused. Similarly, the public could not accept the fact that a meritorious minister was wrongly accused. The former had the Shengguan family of generals incident. If the accusation were to be reversed today, then Yangbuotao's reputation and power in Yutong would rise to a whole new level. No matter how the higher-ups viewed it, they would not be able to do anything to him in the near future. Everyone's attention was on them, waiting quietly to see how Supreme Wind would choose to deal with this difficult situation. Would he step forward to expose the traitor's mask and face the unpredictable crisis head-on? Or would he preserve his useful body and wait for another day to come? Time passed slowly, but Supreme Wind did not appear. Gradually, whispers could be heard from below the stage. Tai Zheng was dressed in martial attire, his left hand on the hilt of his sword while his right hand held onto his glaive, staring at the high platform like a tiger watching its prey. However, there was no movement from the other side. Tai Zheng's heart was beating like a drum. He believed in what Supreme Wind had said, that Yangbuotao must be the traitor, the one who had betrayed the 9 Supremes. However, it was not enough for him to believe in this matter. The public hearing must have sufficient credibility. Only Supreme Wind's appearance could settle the matter. Everything else was as fleeting as the clouds. On the high platform, old Marshal Qiu Jianhan gazed afar, his expression carefree. "Are you coming or not?" After a while, whoosh, whoosh, someone cried out in surprise, "The wind is here. The wind is stronger." Chapter 250. Indeed, the howling northern wind had suddenly grown several times stronger. The flags of the 3 armies fluttered at the same time, adding to the grandeur of the scene. Countless people's expressions changed because of this. Some revealed expressions of joy, some revealed expressions of worry, and there were also expressions of emotions. In the depths of the crowd, there was a small group of people whose expressions did not change, but their gazes shone brightly, and a sharp glint could be faintly seen. Indeed, Qiu Jianhan stood against the wind, his gaze filled with nostalgia. The sound of the wind grew stronger and stronger. His Majesty, who had been waiting with his head lowered, lifted his head abruptly and stood up agitatedly. Yangbuotao's eyes slowly closed. He had come. He had come after all. "I'm done for when he comes." This was something that he had been mentally prepared for, but when it really came, the last bit of luck he had was shattered. All the experts of the 4 Seasons Tower were not bothered with Yangbuotao's emotions. All of them were fully focused, secretly linking their deific consciousness together, covering almost the entire Tiantang Square. "Get ready." The wind rose, sweeping away the clouds. The clouds in the sky rippled, moving from the top of their heads to the other end of the sky. The sky was clear, cloudless for thousands of miles. It was filled with the radiant light of dawn, illuminating the universe. The crowd cheered in Tiantang Square. It was the voice of the people. "Lord Supreme Wind! Lord Supreme Wind!" The deafening cheers continued to resound, many people's eyes brimming with tears. One would not know how to cherish something if one had never lost it. This saying could be used in any situation. When the 9 Supremes were still around, when they were still contributing to the empire, when they were still fighting on the battlefield, everyone respected and revered them, knowing that there were 9 heroes. They were Yutong's guardian angel. However, it was only until they were gone that they truly realized what the 9 Supremes' protection had brought to Yutong. It had been more than a year since the 9 Supremes had met with mishap. War reports from all over had arrived like snowflakes. The entire empire was in a precarious state, with danger looming. Even ordinary families in Yutong had been affected. Along with the battle reports, there were also death notices. If the battle reports from all 4 sides were continuous snowflakes, the countless death notices would be a more violent blizzard. The Empire of Yutong was a nation that benefited from its military and was surrounded by enemies all over the world. The number of Yutong citizens who did not serve in the military was less than 11. Some families with a lot of men could easily send 7 or 8 men out. Every time the military subordinates started to distribute the list of the dead and distribute the compensation items, everyone would stretch their necks and wait anxiously. He was afraid that his name would be called, because once it was called, it would mean that one of his relatives had sacrificed his life for the country. However, this kind of waiting and worry had to wait until all the names were read out. Only after confirming that there were no more enemies could he truly be at ease. Then, he would comfort those who were crying bitterly and go back to wait for the next batch of battle reports. Another round of waiting, another round of torment. Almost everyone had noticed the unprecedented frequency of the battle reports and the sudden increase in the number of deaths in the past year. Originally, when they were together, they would only say, "Have you heard?" in a very coincidental situation. It was said that someone's son from the neighboring village had died there. Then, they would shake their heads and sigh, going about their own business, not hearing any similar news for a long time. However, this was not the case this year. Over the past year, there would be a batch of battle reports every once in a while. The people around him, the people he had met, the people in his neighborhood, the people he had seen with his own eyes. The countless lives he had seen with his own eyes had all turned into a piece of paper, never to be seen again. There were just too many of them. There was a family of 7 brothers who had joined the army to guard the land together. The family had only received a letter from the brothers 2 years ago. It was to report that all 7 brothers were alive and well. However, since last year, it had been basically once a month. Up until now, the family had already received 6 death notices. The poor old lady had already cried herself to death. The mountain people who could not even read a word clearly recognized this, the 9 Supremes. Yutong with the 9 Supremes and without the 9 Supremes was completely different. Previously, with the existence of the 9 Supremes, everyone could live and work in peace. Although it was still dangerous for their loved ones to join the army, it did not matter. They could just treat it as a long journey. They would come back one day. When they came back, it would be a family reunion. There were only so many casualties in a year. How could it be so unlucky as to fall on my family? On this point, it had almost become a common understanding. However, without the 9 Supremes now, every family who sent their children off to war felt the heartache of parting in life and death. Being and not being were 2 different things. As time passed, as the battles grew more frequent and intense, as the country's situation grew more precarious, as more and more people received death notices, everyone was reminiscing about the time when the 9 Supremes still existed. More and more people began to think, if the 9 Supremes lords were still here, how could Yutong have suffered such a great defeat? So many soldiers had perished. If the 9 Supremes lords were still here, my son wouldn't have died. If the 9 Supremes lords were still here. Tai Zheng's battle at Tianxian Cliff had brought back news that there might still be someone alive among the 9 Supremes. The entire nation was in an uproar, but after such a long time, there had been no more accurate news. This made the people hesitate and disappointed. There were even more people who had new thoughts. Perhaps it was a ploy by the higher-ups to reassure the people. Today, however, they could finally see the 9 Supremes lords with their own eyes. There were still people alive among the 9 Supremes lords. At this moment, the wind blew in Yutong. No one could understand the agitation in the hearts of Yutong's people. The people were united, anticipating the reappearance of the 9 Supremes Lords to protect Yutong. The wind howled, gradually turning into a gigantic tornado in the air. It spun rapidly above Tiantang Square. It grew lower and lower. With a long howl, a black silhouette flashed in the air, turning into the image of a person dressed in black, with a black mask covering his face. The person landed lightly on the 200 feet tall flagpole, standing on one leg, his robe fluttering as he looked down. Xiao Jianhan gazed afar, meeting the pair of eyes from afar. His heart skipped a beat. How much desolation and solitude, how much desolation and hatred were contained in those eyes. He had come. Despite the sea of people below him and the tsunami-like cheers, he stood on the flagpole. His tall and straight body was like a sharp sword that pierced the heavens. However, he did not come down. Xiao Jianhan strode out and cupped his fists from afar. Is it Lord Supreme Wind who has arrived? Above the sky, the person in black on the flagpole raised his hand. Supreme Wind's medallion was in sight. Without waiting for Xiao Jianhan to speak, Supreme Wind sneered coldly and said, 9 heavens dictum, residents of 9 Supremes, the wind has come today to settle the feud. On the other side, the residents of 9 Supremes that was still vaguely visible suddenly shook without warning. 9 rainbows shot out abruptly. They soared straight into the sky. Red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, purple, white, and black. The 9 rainbows circled above the blue sky like they were alive, soaring higher and higher like dragons. Slowly, they rose to a height that could not be seen by the naked eye and disappeared. Was this a miracle? Or was it a miracle? It could not be faked, nor could it be replicated. Lord Supreme Wind. It's really Lord Supreme Wind who has reappeared. The entire Tiantang city was in an uproar. When the wind had changed, the people in the square had already sensed it and were delighted. When the silhouette appeared in the wind, Tiantang Square had turned into a sea of joy. Supreme Wind had appeared, he had reappeared in Yutong. There was no need for him to prove his identity. He had only come in the form of the wind and waved his arm. The people were already united and had no more doubts. Furthermore, the residents of 9 Supremes had responded immediately, further proving that Supreme Wind's identity was beyond doubt. There were many soldiers who had never shed a tear in half of their lives, but their eyes were brimming with tears now. The invincible 9 Supremes Lords had finally reappeared today. At the same time, 3 strong deific consciousnesses met in the air. What's going on? The silhouette is definitely there, why can't we control it? I can't lock it down here as well. The silhouette looks real but it's actually illusory. I can't grasp it. It's the same on my side. The wind is formless but it leaves a trace wherever it passes. How can it be so illusory? D***, what's going on? As the 3 deific consciousnesses met and separated, they made their decision swiftly. The silhouette that had appeared stood on top of the flagpole, his voice bleak and desolate. During the battle at Tianxian Cliff that day, my 808 brothers were trapped in a tight encirclement and had to die. Until now, I can still remember their voices and smiles, as if they were right in front of me. Yang Butao, can you tell me why? The battle at Tianxian Cliff. The 9 Supremes had led 800 warriors to be ambushed because they had rushed to the rescue. Who could forget the bloodbath of the heavens? Speaking of this battle, not only was it unforgettable, it was also the most heart-wrenching battle for the people of Yutong in the last 100 years. It was even more painful than the battle where the 3 marshals of the Shengguan family of generals had perished at the hands of Chongqing Path. It was in this battle that the Empire of Yutong had lost the 9 Supremes. The Empire of Yutong had recently been faced with countless impending battles that could not be reversed. It was because of this that countless of Yutong's men had perished. Whether it was for public or private reasons, for the nation or for the people, there was no one in Yutong who did not hate them. They hated those who plotted, they hated those who ambushed and they hated those who killed. However, the people whom Yutang, including the emperor, hated the most were not the murderers who had killed the 9 supremes. It was the people who had betrayed the 9 supremes behind their backs. Everyone wanted to ask, as a citizen of Yutang, why did you do this? Those who were not from the empire of Yutang were Yutang's enemies. They hated the 9 supremes and had even set up layers of schemes and traps to target the 9 supremes. Even if they had resorted to every conceivable means, it was hard to blame them. However, as a citizen of Yutang, why did you do this? Today, at this moment, at this place, this person had appeared and was personally questioned by one of the 9 supremes, Supreme Wind. He had voiced everyone's question, why? Chapter 251. If looks could kill, then Yang Butao would have already been minced into 1,000 pieces and dismembered. Yang Butao's face was ashen, but he was no better than a dead man. Since the moment Supreme Wind had appeared, he knew that he was done for. Any hope he had was in vain. Supreme Wind would rather put himself in danger in order to kill him first. Such staunchness and uncompromising attitude were eye-catching. Heroic and heroic, with no regrets in their hearts. Whatever they want to do, whatever they must do, that has always been the case. Why? I have nothing to say. Yang Butao sucked in a soft breath and chuckled bitterly. Lifting his head to look at Supreme Wind who was on top of the flagpole, he said hoarsely, I know that an apology can hardly mean anything, but I still have to say it, I'm sorry. A cold smile hung on his face behind the mask. The lives of 808 brothers. An apology? Your sorry is really amazing. Yang Butao, you've been blessed by the emperor. You joined the army when you were young, fighting on the battlefield, going through hundreds of battles and achieving the rank of marshal. These are all facts, they can't be erased, and I have no intention of doing so. Supreme Wind's voice carried a sonorous tone amidst the chilly wind. I wonder if Marshal Yang still remembers the saying that has been passed down in Yutang's army for years, live as Yutang's man, die as Yutang's soul. Below, there was only silence. All the soldiers had a calm look on their faces. I'm not willing to erase Marshal Yang's past achievements because I believe that Marshal Yang has carried out this saying before. Supreme Wind's tone was thick with confusion. But it's because of this that I'm even more puzzled. Why? No matter how you look at it, you have no reason to betray us. How can a mere apology be enough to end this karma? Yang Butao chuckled bitterly. Other than being sorry, I have nothing else to say. I have nothing else to explain to Lord Supreme Wind. He took a deep breath. Standing up, he said loudly, since it has come to this today, any excuses are meaningless. I'm a man, I dare to take responsibility for what I've done. I was the one who did what happened back then. Yang Butao hadn't finished speaking when curses and curses sounded out from below, and words of resentment rose and fell without end. Yang Butao wanted to continue, but a voice suddenly hollered, do it. His voice was still ringing in his ears when 3 silhouettes that were faster than lightning leaped up from 3 different directions, heading straight for Supreme Wind who was on the flagpole. On the high platform, 2 faint silhouettes flew up as well, hollering, how dare you, you scoundrel. At the same time, there were dozens of people who suddenly rushed towards the high platform like ferocious tigers. These people were originally scattered in all directions. This action, other than being impressive, also affected the surrounding commoners who were rushing towards the high platform. The commoners who bore the brunt of these people's powerful impact were either knocked away, injured in the sinews or bones, or killed in the most serious cases. The number of casualties was great. Tai Zheng, who had been paying attention to the stage, roared, raising his 24-feet-long saber as he rushed over. Yang Butao, with his eyes were red. The soldiers of the 3 armies who were also on guard moved at the same time, responding immediately. Yunyang stood on the flagpole, facing attacks from all directions, but he was unfazed. He had a plan for coming here today. There was no doubt that he would encounter danger here. There was no doubt that he would encounter danger to his life, however. When he confirmed that the public trial would be held in Tiantang Square, he was even more certain of what was going on. Even if the Four Seasons Tower's forces could set up layers of traps under the stage, as long as he was on the flagpole and had made preparations beforehand, the enemy would not be able to do anything to him, no matter how many tricks they had up their sleeves. As long as he did not land on his own, everything would be fine. Life and death would not be involved. Initially, everything was within his calculations, but when he saw Yang Butao bear all the blame so readily, Yunyang could not help but sigh. It looked like his plan to use Yang Butao's momentum to drag Jiang Zhong and Fu Baoguo out together was going to be in vain. Yunyang could see clearly that when Yang Butao stood up, he was already looking like he was ready to die. With his demeanor, he was most likely going to commit suicide right after he was done speaking, cutting off all clues. This was not an outcome that Yunyang was happy to see. This way, he would lose the possibility of pursuing the other traitors head-on. What happened next, however, was beyond Yunyang's expectations. With Yang Butao's death, the investigation of the traitors had come to an end, and the protection of the other traitors was in line with the Four Seasons Tower's interests. However, the Four Seasons Tower's men had acted ahead of time, surrounding Yunyang from all directions to ambush him. Yunyang's thoughts raced, his mind jolting. How could this be? Has the Four Seasons Tower still not given up on Yang Butao? Before Yunyang could think about it, the three silhouettes who had attacked first had already arrived at lightning speed. Yunyang snorted. His illusory silhouette struck out with his saber, and a dazzling saber gleam appeared out of nowhere. The divine edge struck. One style, two styles, struck at the same time. The saber was merciless, the ultimate saber was chilling, beheading the enemy. The Tao was merciless, heaven's reincarnation, who would the heaven spare? Two rays of saber light spilled out, engulfing the incoming enemies. The three silhouettes who were the first to pounce had cold glints in their hands. They did not evade, but attacked head-on. It was obvious that the three of them did not take Yunyang's strike seriously at all. They intended to break it and win, then kill Supreme Wind of the Nine Supremes in a single strike. However, at the next moment, the saber light that had been swiftly dispelled and even broken through, as expected, did not change at all. It maintained its original trajectory, completely ignoring the resistance that they had unleashed. The golden saber light and palm force that they had unleashed were completely ineffective, as if they did not exist at all. Only the saber light could be seen increasing in intensity. The three of them saw an unprecedented killing intent suddenly appearing in front of them, but they all shouted loudly in unison. Their bodies that were moving at an incredible speed were like ghosts swapping places with each other in the air. The three of them were in the midst of a high-speed charge in midair. It was not something that could be compared to moving on the ground. Although the three of them had only used shifting shadows to support each other once, their true cultivation base had already been exposed. They were pinnacle experts who possessed 10th perfection. The ability of any one of these three people was not inferior to De Yuan's legend, Liang Yunqi, the Dragon of Clouds, who had perished in the residence of 9 Supremes. With such a lineup, it would be more than enough to assassinate the monarch of a country. However, they were not in a good state at the moment. There was a lot of fresh blood dripping from the three of them, as well as the pained moans from the three of them. Yunyang's one style and two styles had successfully injured the three experts. He sighed inwardly as he succeeded. His one and two styles had taken advantage of the opponent's carelessness and the unparalleled sharpness of the saber in his hand, but he could only injure them and not kill them. After all, the difference in their cultivation base was too great. He had the will but not the strength. Thinking deeper, if the three people before him had not underestimated the enemy and had been prepared, not only would they have had the chance to avoid being injured, they would have even had the chance to counterattack. "What saber is this?" one of them blurted out. The reason why the three of them had failed was because of Yun Yang's divine edge, which was marvelous, but the main reason was that the divine edge was too sharp. Not only was it enough to compensate for Yun Yang's lack of cultivation base, it had also broken through the trio's mystical qi defense without any hindrance. How could the three of them not be shocked? They knew that this was not the time to ask questions, but they could not help asking anyway. "A saber that kills." It was not Yun Yang's reply, but the two elders who had charged up behind the trio. Both of them were dressed in loose robes with wide sleeves, their faces unsophisticated. They had actually interfered in between Yun Yang and the trio and attacked without any warning. The two of them had stopped the Four Seasons Tower's three superb experts and were fighting in the air. Although the three superb experts from the Four Seasons Tower were injured, their actual abilities were not greatly diminished. The two elders who had come later had forcefully stopped the trio. Although it was 2 against 3, they were not at a disadvantage. This at least meant that these two men were at least of a similar level. On the other side, the Four Seasons Tower's men had knocked Yang Butao out at once and carried him on their backs. However, they could not simply charge out. Putting aside the fact that Tai Zheng was already charging forward with his target locked on Yang Butao, it was already difficult for Yutong's 4 armies to break through the encirclement. The person who had knocked Yang Butao out had obviously planned this. Even if Yun Yang wanted to stop him, he was too far away, unable to do so. Catch! The person tossed Yang Butao out like a whirlwind. The deicide bow archer was already on standby, but the unexpected turn of events had happened. The speed at which the opponent had tossed Yang Butao out was too fast. Even with the deicide bow archer's reflexes, he did not manage to shoot in time. After all, the stage was surrounded by citizens. If the sniper's arrow did not work, it would definitely affect the crowd below. At this moment, Yang Butao's body was already more than 100 feet away. His momentum gradually slowed down, but he saw a person suddenly jump out from the crowd and catch his body. Then, with a forceful push, this body of more than 200 kilograms was once again sent flying like an arrow. This time, however, Yang Butao's luck was no longer on his side. Swoosh! A cold, black shadow flashed past as a string of blood splattered in the air. Those with better eyesight looked over and saw that it was a mystical steel arrow that had pierced through Yang Butao's thigh. The deicide bow archers were not to be trifled with. Due to the sudden turn of events and the concern of accidentally injuring the citizens, they could not shoot at once. However, how could such an escape mode be repeated? One of the deicide bow archers who was closer fired a shot. The arrow hit, but it was a pity that it only hit the thigh and did not take his life. However, another silhouette appeared on the other side. As he caught Yang Butao, he hurled him out once more. Tai Jing roared and pushed the people around him away. He leaped onto the stage and howled, "Yang Butao!" The bow in his hand was already knocked with an arrow. Looking down from above, it was a soul-chasing arrow. Chapter 252. The bow fired like a thunderbolt, the arrow like a shooting star. Tai Zheng's bow was also made from the horn of the armored rhinoceros. However, Tai Zheng was gifted. Not only was his strength astonishing, his arms were longer than an ordinary person's. His armored rhinoceros bow was made from 2 complete rhinoceros horns and the bowstring was made from double layers of mystical beast tendons. Compared to an ordinary deicide bow, its shooting range and power were many times greater. With 3 consecutive shots, Yang Butao's silhouette had already turned into a tiny black dot in the sky. Tai Zheng did not hesitate to knock the bow and release the arrow. The arrow seemed to ignore the distance, vanishing in a flash. Yun Yang's eyesight was amazing. He could see blood splattering from Yang Buitao's body from afar, but the distance was still too far. He could not be sure where the arrow had hit or if it was fatal. Another person leaped high from below and hugged Yang Buitao's body this time. With a long howl, he flashed a few times in the air, avoiding the other 3 mystical steel arrows, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. With a single thought, Yun Yang turned into a gust of wind and vanished without a trace. Yang Buitao, where are you going? In spite of this, the battle around the stage in Tiantang Square was still in full swing. It was a fiery moment. The assistants that Yang Buitao had brought along had at least a cultivation base of the 7th peak and above, more than half of them had even reached the 9th peak. Comparing their individual cultivation base to the military's experts, their aura alone was enough to keep them in check. However, this so-called all-out suppression was only a theoretical statement. If they were to face the military head-on, especially if they were to fall into the military's encirclement, they would be engulfed by the crowd instantly. Moreover, there was a valiant general like Tai Zheng commanding the battle from the stage. The outcome had long been reversed. Don't let a single one of them escape. Deicide Bao. Shoot at will. Don't miss your shots. Troops on the periphery, retreat collectively. Chase the citizens out of the square, avoid accidental injuries as much as possible. Troops in the middle, maintain your formation, listen to my command. Those on the left, advance, fight with your life. Those on the right, spear forest. Regardless of friend or foe. Those in front and behind, spear forest, regardless of friend or foe. On the high platform, Tai Zheng, who was commanding the battle from above, had already reached the point where his voice was hoarse. The tactic that Tai Zheng was commanding now was the one that the army had used against the martial world's experts. You can fly, run, jump, and fight. You have the upper hand in terms of cultivation, skills, and techniques. Under normal circumstances, I definitely can't beat you. But, I can risk my life. I can die with you in my arms. I'll use my life to create an opening in your defense and drag you along with me. I dare to die, but do you dare? Besieging from all sides, sacrificing one side. The people on this side would risk their lives to tie down these experts. Then, the brothers on the other 3 sides would use their spears to stab themselves and the enemy to death. This was undoubtedly the cruelest way of fighting. However, it was also the most effective way to deal with experts. When experts exchanged blows, the slightest difference could lead to 1,000 miles of error. Therefore, experts were always fighting for the difference of a split second. A split second could determine life and death. Now, the soldiers in the army were using their lives as an opportunity, using their lives as a temporary restraint, forming many moments of difference. As long as any one of these moments of difference was caught, even if one was an expert, even if one's cultivation base was profound, one's body and one's life would only have one life. A few cries of agony could be heard. Those were a dozen Four Seasons Tower's 7th and 8th level experts who were pierced by the spears and completely lost the ability to resist under such an unreasonable, desperate fight. Dozens of soldiers leaped from their brothers' shoulders, brandishing their sabers, pouncing forward like dumplings. One was sent flying, kicked away, followed by another, and another. No matter how agile and timely one's reaction was, one who was already being restrained, as long as one of them was unable to send flying in time, that moment of delay would cause 5 or 6 people to press down on one of them. Following that, hundreds of spears would stab in from all directions. If there was really no gap, they would grit their teeth and tear through their comrades, wanting to stab their targets to death. This was because everyone knew very well. As long as these fallen people stood up again, all the previous sacrifices would be meaningless. All previous efforts would be wasted. Then, they could only fight to the end, until the target was killed. Avenge the 9 Supremes. Annihilate the traitors. Fight to the last man. Tai Zheng hollered with his arms raised. He could see everything clearly from his vantage point on the stage. Tai Zheng did not even use his bow and arrows, throwing his weapons continuously to attack the enemy. Tai Zheng's domineering strength was on full display at this moment. Due to his vantage point, the accuracy of his attacks formed a beautiful line of attack. Due to the participation of the four armies, the scene was chaotic beyond words. However, the 5 people who were fighting high up in the sky had stopped fighting. While the 3 men from the Four Seasons Tower were severely injured and bleeding profusely, the other 2 men could not keep the 3 of them down. There was also, Supreme Wind, who was originally standing on top of the flagpole, had disappeared without anyone noticing. The main target of this battle was gone. What else could they fight for? The battle in the sky could stop, but when the 3 men looked down, they knew that things were not looking good. The 27 to 28 men who had followed Yang Buotao here, other than the men who had been waiting in ambush who had disappeared, had all fallen into Yutong's 4 armies' encirclement. None of them would be able to escape. Even if they went down to help, it would be futile. They might even suffer the same fate and be sent to the netherworld. The mountains are high and the rivers are long, we shall meet again. The 3 of them spat out their last words and turned to leave. Who would have thought that just as they left the area of the flag in the sky, countless deicide magnetite arrows would come at them without a break. Fortunately, the cultivation of these 3 people was indeed not ordinary. They forcefully gathered a breath of vitality and climbed to a higher position. They walked on the void all the way, and only then did they escape the arrow-rain killing formation of the god-slaying mysterious iron arrows. With the departure of the 3 10th perfection experts, the chaotic battle in Tiantang Square gradually came to an end. There were only 7 to 8 9th peak experts who were still resisting with all their might, but they could not hold on for much longer. Other than knowing that the 3 perfection experts who were seen as their last hope had already escaped and there was no possibility of help, it was also because these soldiers had all gone mad. Cultivators who could reach the 9th peak and above were all knowledgeable people. They had traveled extensively and seen countless armies, but they had never seen an army like this. There was only one word in each of their mouths: revenge. With the abilities of 9th peak cultivators, a troop of soldiers was nothing but a joke to them. They could annihilate them with a wave of their hands. There was no possibility of them getting close, let alone engaging in close combat. However, they were now in the midst of the army. All they could see were such ordinary soldiers charging towards them with spears in their hands. They were everywhere. What should they do? They could only rely on their own cultivation base and skill to resist, counter, and evade in a small area. Against such a situation, the so-called mystical skill, skillful shifting, and leveraging force were all a joke. There was no room for them to use them. As for flying up high, it was impossible because once he did so, he would become a live target. There were thousands of deicide bows in Yutong Square that were aimed right at him. What was worse was that these soldiers were not afraid of friendly fire, they were only afraid of not getting hurt. To kill one of their own, they could charge up to 100, 500, or even 1,000 without hesitation. They only hoped to kill one of them. They had witnessed with their own eyes how one of their 9th peak mid-level expert companion was shot by arrows from the deicide bows from all directions the moment he leaped into the air. In the blink of an eye, he was turned into a human-shaped hedgehog, covered from head to toe in arrows. Although the rain of arrows had cost Yutong's military 20 to 30 lives, no one was moved. No one was moved. "Avenge the 9 Supreme's lords," a soldier cried out shrilly, leaping up and diving down from high above. The 9th peak expert narrowed his eyes and swung his saber at lightning speed. As expected, he easily chopped off the soldier's arms. The expert was about to swing his saber again to chop off the soldier's head when the armless soldier unexpectedly lowered his head, opened his mouth wide, and bit down viciously. He actually used his own teeth to bite the blade that was tempered 100 times. While the 9th peak expert had fought many formidable enemies, he had never faced such a ferocious enemy before. His heart skipped a beat, but he did not hesitate at all. With a clang, the tip of his saber touched the soldier's teeth. There was a soft sound of impact before the saber slid through. The armless soldier's unexpected ferocious attack had only managed to buy a short gap that could not even be considered as time. In spite of this, there were already 5 to 6 soldiers who had taken the opportunity to pounce forward. The hundreds of people around them shouted in unison, "Revenge! Revenge!" Hundreds of spears stabbed in at the same time. The ninth peak expert knew that it was too late to dodge and that it was too late for him to defend himself with his spinning blade. All he could do was muster his cultivation base and retaliate forcefully. Even though he managed to send the 5 or 6 soldiers flying and evade the spears around him, he still staggered backward from the impact. Just as he retreated, more spears stabbed at him from the side. Then, no matter how hard the expert of the ninth peak tried to defend himself, he still perished under the endless human wave tactic. The battle had only lasted for about the time it took to brew a pot of tea. The 27 to 28 people that Yang Buotao had brought with him had all died beneath the stage without exception. Among them, the furthest that had charged out was only 2,000 feet away. Tai Zheng limped over, his face drenched in blood. Tai Zheng was not supposed to be injured, but the ninth peak expert who had held on until the end was too powerful. Tai Zheng had joined in the battle. Although he had successfully killed the man, he had paid a hefty price. His waist and thighs had been stabbed more than a dozen times. There were also accidental injuries from his own men. Tai Zheng's buttocks and thighs had been hit more than a dozen times. Although his anus had not been mutilated, he was covered in wounds. Marshal Tai had almost died along with him. Chapter 253. It was not only Tai Zheng, even old Marshal Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin were covered in blood. How could the two old generals miss such a battle? In fact, it was thanks to their extraordinary cultivation base that each of them had managed to fend off an expert from the enemy. It was also because of their experienced commanding that the situation of the battle was even more favorable, finally annihilating all of the Four Seasons Tower's experts. Count the casualties and losses. Tai Zheng's expression was grim. These ambushers were all dead, but Yang Buotao's fate was unknown. From the fact that he had been rescued, the outcome of the public trial could be considered a failure. Moreover, the number of casualties today was going to be a shocking one. Casualties. After a long time, an assistant general rubbed his eyes and said in a low voice, 6,342 brothers who died in the battle. Among them, Wan Fenggui, Wang Dezhu, Wei Dexu, the 3 generals have all perished. In addition, the muscles on Tai Zheng's face twitched. How many enemies? 28 of them killed. 28 of them. The muscles on Tai Zheng's face were twitching madly. Just these 28 people took away 6,342 of my brothers? He turned his head slowly and looked at the bloodied faces around him. For a moment, his heart was heavy. He had only been focused on annihilating the enemy earlier and had not thought about the casualties on his side. Although Tai Zheng had expected the heavy casualties on his side, he was still pained when he heard that they had actually suffered such a heavy loss. Marshal Tai. This humble officer thinks that even if the brothers who died in this battle, they will feel gratified. Their deaths will be worth it. A fellow who had lost an arm and an ear stood up with all his might. The injured brothers will also feel that it's worth it. Gratifying. Around them, countless wounded soldiers cheered in unison, that's right. Worth it. Gratifying. Because we have done something for the 9 Supremes Lords after all. The soldiers looked solemn. Before this, it has always been the 9 Supremes Lords who have shielded us from the wind and rain, saving us from danger and death. We have never done our part for the 9 Supremes Lords. Now that we're facing their enemies, we're willing to put our lives on the line no matter how hard we fight. Tai Zheng heaved a long sigh towards the sky. Suddenly, he laughed with tears in his eyes. 9 Supremes Lords, our brothers have avenged all of you. Do you see this? Xiao Jianhan was panting heavily when he saw a guard rushing in. He called out to him, "What happened?" This guard was the person that he had left behind to pass on the news. Why would he come in such a hurry? Could it be that something had happened? The guard said anxiously, the fire in Yang Buto's residence was so intense that it couldn't be extinguished. It was Madame Yang who poured all the kerosene in the residence onto the blankets and other things. The entire Yang residence, 71 people, none of them survived. Xiao Jianhan shuddered while Tai Zheng turned abruptly as well, looking at the guard with a complicated expression. Madame Yang must have gathered everyone beforehand and drank the poison. The guard was a little frightened. There was only a parcel pressed against a rock in the courtyard. Inside is a letter. The guard presented a letter with both hands. There were a few delicate words on it, to old Marshal Qiu. Xiao Jianhan's eyes were rimmed with tears as he accepted it with trembling hands. He tore the seal off and unfolded it. "Uncle, this niece bids farewell today. This niece has been the wife of a hero for half my life, it's enough. I don't think that I've embarrassed my parents. I won't be a sinful wife even at the last moment. I'm willing to die with honor, to live without humiliation. This niece doesn't know about Yang Buto. Uncle, don't be ashamed of this niece. In front of my parents' graves, I hope that uncle can discern for me. This unfilial daughter bids farewell." Xiao Jianhan's hands were trembling as tears streamed down his cheeks. This was the daughter left behind by the brother who had died on the battlefield. The last words he left behind in his life were to defend himself. "I didn't know. If I had known, there would have been a different outcome. I didn't let you down. I didn't let my parents down. I didn't let Yutang down." Leng Daoyin leaned over to take a look and sighed deeply, saying in a low voice, "It's the child left behind by San Lang." Xiao Jianhan's eyes were brimming with hot tears. "Pack up and report to His Majesty as soon as possible." On the same afternoon, the imperial edict was announced. Yang Buto had colluded with the enemy and betrayed the country. His crime was unpardonable. He had conspired to murder the 9 Supremes and caused their deaths, plunging the empire into a precarious situation. The fugitive Yang, if discovered, could be executed by anyone. Anyone who reported traitor Yang's whereabouts would be rewarded with 1,000 silver taels. Those who killed traitor Yang would be rewarded with 10,000 gold taels and be made a marquis of 10,000 households. That was the general meaning of the edict. The northern troop was reorganized from top to bottom. His Majesty had personally decreed that the eastern marshal, Tai Zheng, was to be transferred to the north along with his accompanying officers. The position of the eastern marshal would be temporarily taken over by the eastern troop's assistant marshal. This transfer was a last resort. The northern troops' morale was low now. They needed a strong marshal to reunite them before they could be put to use. Other than Tai Zheng, there was no other person in the entire empire of Yutang at this stage. On the same night, Tai Zheng brought a few janissaries and stepped into the northern troops' military camp. Yang Buto's janissaries and subordinates had long been under control. Fortunately, these people were well behaved and did not resist, which saved them a lot of trouble. Once Tai Zheng arrived, he was the first to request to see these people. The northern military camp was currently shrouded in an indescribable atmosphere of deathly stillness. All Tai Zheng could see were the gazes of people who were on the brink of death. They were filled with despair and sorrow. All 500 of Yang Buto's janissaries were there. All of them were filled with the will to die. The will to die did not belong to anyone else but themselves. "Everyone, gather." Tai Zheng walked in with large strides and commanded loudly, his voice reverberating throughout the place. As soon as the order was given, the 500 men, though their expressions were weary and their spirits were even more dispirited, they still gathered together swiftly. From this, it could be seen that this group of people were the cream of the crop. As the janissaries of the marshal, how could they be qualified if they did not possess a certain level of capability, loyalty, and self-awareness to follow orders? Tai Zheng could not help but be even more certain of his earlier decision, but his face was still dark as he walked to a higher spot. His body was already taller than an ordinary person's, but he liked to stand on high ground. Now that he was looking down from above, he seemed even taller and stronger. He looked like an iron tower, standing there majestically. "Why are all of you lowering your heads?" Tai Zheng hollered, "Raise your heads." There was still silence below, not many of them had lifted their heads. Tai Zheng scoffed and said, "Are you all rebelling? Didn't you hear the military order I gave just now? All of you, raise your heads with your chests up. Everyone, look at me." Military law was absolute. Since Tai Zheng was the highest commanding officer here, his order was a military order. Everyone present had to execute it unconditionally, without any hesitation. With this command, all 500 of them raised their heads with their chests up, their gazes focused on Tai Zheng. Whether these 500 janissaries were willing or unwilling, all they could see at this moment was Tai Zheng's mighty image. "I don't want to say too much about pretty words and threats," Tai Zheng said, "although Yang Buitao's crimes are unpardonable, this person still has a bottom line after all. He didn't bring anyone from the military with him at the last moment. No matter how heinous his crimes are, it's good that he didn't drag any of you into this during today's public trial. At least he still has a shred of conscience. As expected of a real man." Tai Zheng said, "All of you are his janissaries, this can't be changed. However, regarding Yang Buitao's betrayal of the 9 Supreme's lords, I believe that none of you are involved. He would never dare complete such a thing through your hands. If it were me, I would have done it myself. The implications of this matter are too great. No matter how much I trust all of you, there will always be concerns. Therefore, this must be Yang Buitao's doing alone, it has nothing to do with all of you. All of you don't have to look dead now. No one says what to do to all of you. After all, other than being Yang Buitao's janissaries, all of you are soldiers of the Northern Troop and Yutong's military men. This cannot be denied." Once Tai Zheng said this, everyone's eyes shone. "Now, I'll give all of you the chance to choose freely. The first choice is, those who are willing to follow Yang Buitao and stay by his side through life and death. You can step out now and I won't hold you accountable, I'll respect your feelings and choices. However, your military status will be revoked and you'll become a free man from now on, free to live or die as you please. The second choice is that I, Tai Zheng, have come to lead the northern troop under the Emperor's order. I've only brought less than 30 men with me, so I lack janissaries of my own, janissaries who can accompany me on the battlefield to kill the enemy and entrust my back to them. If all of you are willing to become my janissaries, I'll gladly accept it. As for the third choice, it's to remove your original identity as janissaries, disband the organization and join the army. You can start from the bottom and slowly prove your loyalty to the Empire of Yutong on the battlefield. I choose the third choice." The janissary general raised his hand and said, "Join the army and start from the bottom." Tai Zheng's eyes shone as he focused his gaze on the general. He had said "I" and not "we." This was tantamount to leaving room for his other brothers to choose. After all, if they chose to become Tai Zheng's janissaries, they could prove themselves as well. After the first person had voiced out his choice, more and more people stepped forward to choose the third option. Finally, 471 men stood out from the 500 men, all of them choosing the third option. However, there were still 29 men who stood where they were, their expressions blank and blank. Tai Zheng asked, "What's your choice?" A tall man with a face full of scars stood up and said, "I choose the first option." Tai Zheng's gaze froze. It was unknown if it was because the man with a face full of scars had spoken up first, but the other 28 men followed suit and said, "We choose the first option as well." Tai Zheng nodded slowly and said, "All right. Clerk, record these 29 men and process them according to the normal discharge procedures. Issue them a return ticket and revoke their military status. They will leave the army from now on. Pass my order as well, no one is allowed to trouble them with the excuse of being Yang Butao's janissaries. Those who disobey will be severely punished." "Yes. Thank you, Marshal Tai." Chapter 254. The tall leader said, "It's not that we are unwilling to serve the country, it's just that." He sighed and said, "There's no need for the money to return home. We are eternally grateful for Marshal Tai's order today. We bid our farewells here." As his words trailed off, he led his brothers out of the camp. The 471 men who had chosen to start over from the bottom stood silently, sending off their brothers who had chosen to leave with their gazes. Just like Tai Zheng had said, there was no regret for those who stayed, no guilt for those who left. Everyone had their own ambitions and followed their own hearts. Tai Zheng's gaze was trained on the Janissary general who puffed up his chest and said, "Don't blame us, Marshal Tai. As Marshal Yang's Janissary, if we were to be taken in by Marshal Tai as your Janissary, even if the brothers of the northern troop won't be dissatisfied with the Marshal, we won't be able to rest easy. We're willing to kill the enemy and start over. To us, as long as we can fight on the battlefield again, it's enough." Tai Zheng sighed. He knew the meaning of the Janissary general's words. Although he had stated clearly that these Janissary soldiers had not participated in framing the 9 Supremes and should not be punished for it, Yutong's soldiers and military brothers did not know the reason. If they saw the Janissary soldiers who had followed the treacherous officials become the new favorite Janissary of the northern troops succeeding Marshal, how could they not feel resentful? Oh, how could those who had made a mistake continue to enjoy their original treatment? There was no such logic. "Very well. I respect your individual choices," Tai Zheng said, "collect your names and military records later. Start all over again from the lowest rank. I'll only say this once more. From now on, we shall walk this journey together and not speak of the past. From now on, the northern troop's surname is Tai." Tai Zheng lifted his head and spoke in a faint but resolute tone, "Pass down my military order. The northern troop will set up a new training camp. The original training content will be doubled. The northern troop's training base will be expanded immediately. Within a month, I want to see 30,000 trained soldiers to join the war at the northern border. If the soldiers who are on duty do not meet the combat requirements, the training general will be beheaded. If there's any disturbance in the northern barracks within Yutong's borders, the commanding general will be beheaded immediately without any chance to defend himself. Tomorrow, assemble 10,000 soldiers and follow me to the northern frontier. This battle is directed at the empire's northern border. I, Tai Zheng, shall flatten the northern border. I shall not return without victory." That afternoon, Tai Zheng patrolled the northern troops' camp for the first time, gathering the high-ranking generals for a lecture. On the same night, the eastern troop gathered a list of 1,000 people that Tai Zheng needed and had them report to the northern troop immediately. All of them were then dismissed and returned home to reunite with their families. The next morning, the sky had just brightened. Tai Zheng led an army of 10,000 men and officially departed, galloping towards the northern border. That very night, 17 of Yang Butao's 29 personal guards committed suicide in front of the ruins of Yang Butao's old house. The other 12 were nowhere to be found. If Yang Butao had died because he was wronged or because he had no other choice, then the number of people who sacrificed their lives would probably increase by several times. However, it was true that Yang Butao had betrayed the 9 Supremes in his crime of treason. In the end, only these 17 people died here, paying with their lives. Even so, these 17 corpses that still stood erect still caused a stir in the capital city. Qiu Jianhan personally ordered the burial and sighed, such a good man, yet he ended up like this. It's a pity. Sigh. No matter what reason Yang Butao had for killing the 9 Supremes, his conduct as a marshal of an army is indeed worthy of his reputation. That afternoon, Yun Yang chased after Yang Butao all the way out of Tiantang City. Initially, Yun Yang had thought that Yang Butao's betrayal of the 9 Supremes was exposed and his act of treason was obvious. He was no longer of any value to the Four Seasons Tower and was completely abandoned. Whether it was on the surface or the inside, to Yutong, to the Four Seasons Tower, to the 9 Supremes, or even to himself, there was no chance of survival left. However, the Four Seasons Tower's combat power had unexpectedly come to his rescue. Many experts of the 7th peak and above who had died in this battle could be said to have died because of Yang Butao. This was completely illogical, especially not in line with the Four Seasons Tower's conduct. Unless Yang Butao had something that Yun Yang and the Empire of Yutong did not know about. Whether this was his identity, background, or some kind of secret, it was unknown. However, since this was worthy of the Four Seasons Tower's attention, the place that Yang Butao was going to next must be one of the Four Seasons Tower's bases. Such a base was what Yun Yang yearned for the most. How could he let it go? Yun Yang utilized the power of wind and cloud at the same time. It looked like the biting cold wind was urging the white cloud in the sky to travel at lightning speed, but the white cloud that Yun Yang had transformed into was actually moving on its own, traveling even faster with the wind. It was also because of this that Yun Yang realized the answer to a question that he had not figured out before. Yun Yang had always been confident about his own safety. Even if the Four Seasons Tower really had the ability to go to heaven, it was impossible for them to set up a spiritual ceiling formation like the one at Tianxian Cliff under Tiantang Square overnight. On the day of the public trial, as long as he did not go down to join the battle, he, who had the 5 abilities, could change his form at any time and would not be afraid of any ambush. What Yun Yang could not understand was why the Four Seasons Tower was so confident. They did not take any additional action and allowed the public trial to proceed smoothly. Was it just to let Supreme Wind appear? If that was the case, did it not mean that they had the confidence to kill Supreme Wind the moment he appeared? However, what would they use to complete the kill? Before going to Tiantang Square, Yun Yang had not figured out the answer. However, the moment he arrived at Tiantang Square, Yun Yang acutely felt a threat that came from the sky. The sense of threat was unprecedentedly strong, but only Ling Xiaozui's domineering aura the other day could be stronger. In other words, the source of this threat was a superb expert, a pinnacle expert who had surpassed the level of 10th perfection. However, Yun Yang was not the least bit afraid. His cultivation base had improved tremendously and was no longer comparable to the time when he faced He Hanqing. Furthermore, he was already prepared to turn into the wind and leave at any time. Once he willed it, no one would be able to catch him. However, when he tailed the expert who had saved Yang Butao all the way out of the city, Yun Yang finally realized what he had been afraid of, or rather, the Four Seasons Tower's real killer move against Supreme Wind, was. Behind him, there was a saber shadow that seemed to have turned into a green color, tailing the gust of wind that he had transformed into. If it was not for Emmy's support that increased the observation ability of his deific consciousness, he would not have realized that there was a saber hidden in the sky. He circulated the power of wind and cloud at the same time. One of the forces moved forward as the wind while his body blended into the white clouds in the sky, traveling with the wind. As for the saber light, it had been tailing behind the cold wind, neither too fast nor too slow, neither too close nor too far away. Yun Yang had changed the speed of the wind a few times, whether it was slow or fast, but the saber light had maintained its inseparable state, tailing him just like that. In any case, it had used some unknown method to lock on to the force of his wind transformation. Yun Yang's heart skipped a beat. Was this the Four Seasons Tower's ultimate killer move? If he was really Eighth Brother Supreme Wind, he would only have the ability of the wind manifestation. He did not know if the hidden saber light really had the power to annihilate the wind manifestation. As long as he followed it like this, when his mystical chi cultivation base was exhausted and he had no choice but to return to his human form from his wind manifestation, it would be the time he would be killed by the saber. Thinking of this, Yun Yang was struck with a flash of inspiration. He recalled what Mi Kongquan had said to him before he died when he had killed him. Right, be careful, there's a saber in the sky. Yun Yang had not understood what it meant before this. There was a saber in the sky? How could there be a saber in the sky? Now, however, he understood. There was indeed a saber in the sky. It was a saber that had no shape or form at all. Now, at this very moment, this saber was the Four Seasons Tower's ultimate weapon to kill him. Yun Yang believed that in the eyes of this saber, Yun Yang, who had transformed into the wind, had been completely locked onto. He was now a child in the palm of the saber, a fish on the anvil, at his mercy. As long as he continued to wait, he could wait for the wind to return to its human form and confirm the identity of the target. He would then know if the target had any other henchmen. Only then would he carry out the finishing move, uprooting and annihilating them once and for all. Why doesn't he do it now? If he were to follow me for such a long distance, there might be changes. Even if my cultivation base is shallow and I don't notice it, it's impossible for me to not notice it all the time. On the contrary, if my manifestation is broken, I won't be able to escape his grasp and I'll definitely be captured. Why go through so much trouble? Yes, even if he could completely lock onto the wind manifestation, he wouldn't be able to break the wind manifestation directly. Yun Yang pondered and came to a conclusion. Then, is this saber in the sky a person? Or is it only a saber being controlled by a person? In front of them, the person who had rescued Yang Buotao from the public trial was still carrying Yang Buotao on his back and was still sprinting forward. His speed was exactly the same as before and had not slowed down at all. They were now 200 miles away from Tiantang City. However, the person was still sprinting forward. There was a tall mountain in front of them, and on top of it was a dense forest. The person was moving very quickly, running at full speed without holding back. Yun Yang even noticed that the person had spat out a mouthful of blood as he ran, but instead of slowing down, he was running even faster. This meant that the person was using some sort of self-mutilation to forcefully propel himself to maintain his high speed. It was almost as if he was risking his life. Was it because Yang Buotao was too important, or Yun Yang's heart skipped a beat? Could it be that the other side in front is their real trap against me? Was the action in Tiantang Square just a pretense? That's right, it's indeed easy to set up some strange formations in such a desolate place. Chapter 255. They had sacrificed Yang Buotao, the marshal of the northern troop, 30 experts from the Four Seasons Tower, and sent out a mysterious saber in the sky to set up a fatal trap at a faraway place. This trap was very ingenious and targeted. This person who had saved Yang Buotao's life was escaping. Based on the current situation, no one else could catch up to him. Even if someone did, they would be killed by that saber. Only Supreme Wind's wind attribute manifestation could possibly catch up to him. As long as Supreme Wind caught up, the plan would be considered half completed. As for Yang Buotao, he was burdened with the blood feud of murdering the 9 Supremes. How could Supreme Wind not chase after the target of Supreme Wind's reappearance? Even if he knew the risk, he would still give chase. Therefore, this targeted plan was indeed flawless and flawless. Furthermore, If Yun Yang was only supreme wind and only had the power of wind manifestation, he would not even be able to notice the saber that was locked onto him from behind. That would be the end. It was a pity that the culprit of the wind manifestation was not supreme wind but supreme cloud. The so-called flawless targeted trap had a huge loophole. Yun Yang quickly came to a conclusion that there must be a trap in front of him. It was very likely to be a trap like the one at Tianxian Cliff that could lock down and restrict the manifestation ability, the spiritual ceiling formation. This was also the opponent's main killing move against Supreme Wind. Even if there was an accident and the spiritual ceiling formation could not kill him in the end, it would not matter. The saber that was following him would become a backup and continue to follow him. He could not maintain the wind manifestation forever. Once his mystical chi cultivation base was exhausted, he would have to return to his human form eventually. Once he did so, he would die as well. In addition, the opponent must be thinking of following the clues to get rid of the threat once and for all. Yun Yang's mind raced, planning how to deal with the current crisis. Now, he had changed from being a hunter to being hunted. The situation was precarious and he had to think of a way to deal with it. There was no doubt that Heaven's Saber's cultivation base was unfathomable. What was more frightening was that Yun Yang did not even know how high this person's level was. Yun Yang was not even sure if Supreme Lord Springfrost, He Hanqing, had such a cultivation base when he was at his peak. Although He Hanqing had heavily injured Yun Yang who was in his wind manifestation with a single palm strike, it had been an unexpected turn of events and Yun Yang had just broken through. It was inevitable that he had been high-spirited and careless. More importantly, Yun Yang had just broken through to the 5th peak then and his manifestation cultivation base was only at the 4th level at most. Now, not only had his cultivation base increased tremendously, his manifestation cultivation base had also improved tremendously. Moreover, he was fully focused and cautious at all times. In such a state, Yun Yang was confident that even if he were to face He Hanqing, it would not be a problem for him to escape unscathed even if he still could not defeat him in a direct confrontation. In spite of this, the saber in the sky had locked onto and tracked Yun Yang like a maggot in a tarsal bone. It was not far from him, neither too fast nor too slow. Yun Yang was already shocked and terrified by it. Yun Yang even suspected that he would need to be at the level of Ling Xiaozue, Jun Moyan, and Dugu Chou to have such an ability. Even if there was still a gap, it would not be very far. With his current cultivation base, whether he could escape the pursuit of the saber in the sky or not, as long as his true identity was exposed, not only Yun Yang himself, but the entire residence of Yun would be annihilated. Yun Yang believed that even if the residence of Yun combined all of its combat power, it would still not be a match for the saber. This was the Four Seasons Tower's true ability. However, how was he going to deal with this person? To Yun Yang, it was not difficult to simply escape. He was not Supreme Wind after all, he only had the wind manifestation power, especially now that he still had the advantage. Now that he had the initiative and discovered the other party, it was not difficult for him to break away from the other party's pursuit. However, if he did so, Yang Buotao would definitely be able to escape. This was something that Yun Yang could not accept and was unwilling to do. Today, he had reappeared as one of the 9 Supremes with the ultimate goal of targeting Yang Buotao. If he were to escape, not only would it be a waste of effort, it would be a huge loss. How would he be able to face his brother's coffins? Yun Yang steeled his heart. He could not watch Yang Buotao being rescued, no matter what. This person had to die. The enemy who killed his brothers had already been caught by him, so he had to die. If he were to let the tiger return to the mountain today, he did not know when he would be able to see it again. Yun Yang carefully separated a strand of his attention to continue controlling the howling wind. He was still drifting with the white clouds, but he was deliberately and covertly gathering the clouds from all directions, slowly gathering them together, causing the sky to gradually darken. It looked like it was about to rain. Lightning began to flicker slowly in the clouds. Yun Yang was multitasking, using his various skills to weave a beautiful, hidden setup. However, the gale did not show any signs of slowing down, continuing to chase after the black silhouette in front until it rushed into the forest on the other end. When the gale entered the forest, there was a faint mystical saber light in the sky. However, the saber light disappeared in a flash, as if it had never existed. It was as if it had returned to waiting. Half of his mission had been completed. He only needed to wait for the follow-up results. Supreme Wind had already chased after the person into the forest. What followed next was the matter on the other side. Even if the formation on the other side could not kill Supreme Wind would still turn into the wind and escape in the end. As long as he turned into the wind and escaped, Yun Yang would be able to track him immediately since he had already locked onto his aura, all the way to his lair. Perhaps he could wait until the moment when his mystical chi was exhausted. Whether it was to eliminate the root of the problem or to kill Supreme Wind alone, Supreme Wind was dead for sure. Although he had promised Ice to bring Yang Buotao back alive, if Yang Buotao were to be killed before he could do anything, he could only blame it on his bad luck. The priority of this mission was to kill the 9 Supremes. The forest was filled with plants, so the visibility was much lower than on flat ground. What was more, the sudden shroud of dark clouds made the surroundings so dark that one could not even see their own fingers. In spite of this, the black silhouette still carried Yang Buotao and moved forward quickly without any delay. It was obvious that he was very familiar with the terrain of the forest. The howling of the wind suddenly increased in volume. Yang Buotao, who was lying on the back of the black silhouette, was still unconscious. There was a transparent hole on his thigh, where an arrow from the deicide bow had pierced through his thigh, taking away a section of his femur bone. If there was no special bone-forging technique, Yang Buotao would inevitably be crippled for life. There was another mystical steel arrow stuck on his waist, only half of the shaft exposed. Yang Buotao was wearing a soft armor made of an unusual material, but the mystical steel arrow had been shot by Tai Zheng with all his might. It had actually pierced through the soft armor and pierced into Yang Buotao's body. Looking at the depth, it had already entered the abdominal cavity. The gale was like a knife, causing the entire forest to emit a strange sound that resembled the wailing of ghosts and the howling of deities. Countless tree branches snapped, hitting the black silhouette and Yang Buotao like a thunderstorm. Blades of wind appeared out of nowhere and danced behind the two of them, showing off their sharpness. Amidst the darkness and chaos, the black figure was unable to dodge at all. He could only let out a wild roar and spit out a mouthful of blood. Green light blossomed from his body, and he used his pure profound chi cultivation to envelop both of their bodies. He mustered up his courage and continued to advance forward. However, his speed was inevitably slowed down. The black silhouette knew that the destination of the trap was at the top of the mountain. However, with his speed and Supreme Wind's constant attacks, it would be difficult for him to make it to the top of the mountain. Fourth Xiao. The black silhouette increased the circulation of mystical chi, maintaining his defensive state. As he sprinted upwards with all his might, he suddenly shouted, "Come down and pick me up." On the top of the mountain, someone answered. Then, the rapid sound of the wind could be heard. The change was within the black silhouette's expectations. After Supreme Wind had sensed his call for help, he had pushed the wind attribute attack to its maximum limit. It was obvious that he wanted to kill both himself and Yang Buotao before the black silhouette's reinforcements arrived. It seemed that Supreme Wind really hated Yang Buotao to the core and would not rest until he was dead. Even though he understood this, the black silhouette was powerless. If he was at his peak, he would be able to fight Supreme Wind's wind blade encirclement. Even if he could not, it would not be a problem for him to hold on until the reinforcements arrived or to the top of the mountain. However, he had fought his way out of Tiantang City. He had even borrowed the advantage of being in the outermost layer, sprinting all the way down from the city wall. Up till now, he had forcefully activated the life force arcane art twice. He was already at the end of his tether. If he was not at the end of his tether, why would he have to call for help? He might not be able to defend himself against a fifth peak cultivator's attack now. The wind blades flew wildly. Finally, with a pop, the mystical cheese air shield broke while the expert spat out a mouthful of blood. He staggered, carrying Yang Buotao on his back as he crashed into a big tree. The mouthful of blood was not the price of forcefully activating the arcane art. He was seriously injured. The black silhouette was finally exhausted, unable to hold on any longer. However, the sound of the wind was still shrill as the wind blades continued to fall. Swoosh, 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 with a flash of cold light, blood splattered. The black silhouette expert who had been carrying Yang Buotao on his back had actually cried out before his head was separated from his body, heading to the underworld. At the same time that the black silhouette expert had perished, a gush of warmth flowed into Yun Yang's senses. It was the qi of injustice. Yun Yang snorted softly as he materialized again. Above him, another black silhouette shot over like an arrow. Supreme Wind. You live up to your reputation indeed. Take this. Chapter 256. Not only did Yang Buotao not accept the attack, he had also carried Yang Buotao up into the air. The silhouette hollered and changed his direction at the last moment, leaping up from halfway up the mountain. His body was like a javelin as he leaped hundreds of feet into the air, grabbing onto Yang Buotao's legs by a hair's breadth. Come down. Yang Buotao had just gotten rid of the enemy and had yet to catch his breath. Moreover, he had just gotten up and the wind was still rising. With a soft sound, Yang Buotao was pulled down by the person. However, the wind howled once more, chasing after him with a howl. Yang Buotao was caught in the middle of the two tugs. Due to the fact that he was unconscious, his mystical qi could only circulate passively. How could he withstand such a pull? He spat out a mouthful of blood while Yang Buotao slowly regained consciousness, only to see a green silhouette pouncing towards him from midair. His body was being carried by someone as he ran for his life. Put me down. Yang Buotao coughed, calling out with an unknown source of strength, its Lord Supreme wind up there. Yang Buotao has something to say. The person carrying him was startled by this sudden reaction. He did not expect that he would suddenly be ambushed, and that the person who ambushed him was Yang Buotao himself. The moment Yang Buotao regained consciousness, he suddenly gathered all the strength in his body, and with a desperate stance, he struck the person's back with his palm. Although Yang Buotao was seriously injured, as the commander of an army, his profound qi cultivation was naturally not mediocre. Moreover, under such a situation where there was no distance between them and they were completely defenseless, Yang Buotao had suddenly struck a vital point on his back. Even if the black-clothed man's cultivation was far above Yang Buotao's, he still violently spat out a mouthful of blood. His body staggered, and Yang Buotao, who was behind him, was separated from his back. He tumbled down and crashed into a large tree trunk, spitting out a mouthful of blood. You bastard. The black-clothed man felt as if all the bones in his back had been shattered by Yang Buotao's palm, and his eyes widened in anger. Yun Yang was surprised to see the sudden turn of events, but he quickly adapted to the situation and focused his attack on the black silhouette. The black silhouette, who had been passively attacked by Yang Buotao's palm, lost his footing and was flustered. How could he deal with Yang Buotao's ferocious attack? He was struck once again, his entire body slamming against the tree trunk, almost fainting from the pain. He knew that he had suffered a serious internal injury. Seeing the green ball of wind slowly descending, his intention to pursue was obvious. He cursed hatefully, good words can't persuade a damned ghost. Even if you pull yourself out of the gates of hell, you'll still crash back into it. With that said, he turned around and left. He couldn't stay any longer. If he stayed any longer, he would probably die here as well. Yang Buotao's mind was in a trance as he watched a cyan gas swirl down from the sky and land in front of him. It was a cyan silhouette, ethereal and indistinct. He could not help but ask, "May I ask if Supreme Wind is here in person?" Yunyang replied faintly, "Yang Buotao, what do you have to say to me?" Yang Buotao's earlier attack had injured the black silhouette, but he had also suffered from the reverse impact of the mystical qi. With his frail body that had been repeatedly injured, he was in a precarious situation. With just a slight struggle, the mystical steel arrow at his waist had almost split his upper and lower body into two. It was obvious that he would not survive. Spitting out mouthfuls of blood, he no longer had the air of a marshal of the northern troop. He stared at Yunyang and said, "Lord Supreme Wind, is my wife?" Yunyang pondered and said, "You should know your wife's personality. Think about it yourself, how likely is it that she's still alive now?" Yang Buotao's gaze dimmed as he said, "I've let her down." Yunyang said coldly, "Yang Buotao, you haven't let her down, nor have you let me down. But as a citizen of Yutang, don't you feel that you've let down this country? Let down the brothers who shouldn't have died but have died because of what you've done?" Yang Buotao's gaze dimmed as he said, "Now that things have come to this, there's no point in talking more." Yunyang's murderous intent had long been uncontrollable. If Yang Buotao had not risked his life to attack the black silhouette, Yunyang would not have given him a chance to speak. He said in a low voice, "You said you had something to tell me just now. Was it only to ask about your wife's whereabouts?" Yang Buotao chuckled with difficulty, blood trickling from the corners of his mouth as he said bitterly, "When I was young, my parents were kind and loving. My days were happy and peaceful. However, when I was 12, my mother passed away in an accident. My father was traumatized and disappeared. It was also that year that I entered the military. After so many years of war, I became the marshal of the northern troop. I, Yang Buotao, could be considered to have achieved success and recognition. I don't think I've disgraced my ancestors. It was until the year before last when my father found me." He looked haggard, like he didn't have long to live. Yang Buotao chuckled miserably and said, "At the time, I reunited with my family after a long separation. Other than being overjoyed, I also lamented that I wanted to raise my son but my parents weren't around. I waited by my father's bedside for months and even missed a great battle. However, there was only one wish in my heart then. As long as my father could recover, I, Yang Buotao, would willingly die for it, even if I, Yang Buotao, had to die a horrible death. It was a pity that no one could make my father's health better, even if I, Yang Buotao, had to die a horrible death. Just as I was feeling helpless and heartbroken, my father told me that his injuries were incurable, but there was still a way for him to continue living. It was just that this method was extremely difficult." Yunyang listened carefully. Yang Buotao's voice was weak. Every word he uttered was choppy. However, Yunyang knew that what Yang Buotao was saying now was not a lie. From the mouths of the many doctors I'd invited, I'd already known that my father's illness was incurable and that there would be no turning point. Yet, hearing my father say that there was a way, it was heavenly. Back then, I only knew that I had to save my father's life. Even if I had to go through a mountain of blades and a sea of fire, I wouldn't hesitate. What difficulty was there to be afraid of? Therefore, my father told me that his physical condition was one that defied nature, an injury inflicted by heaven's wrath. This injury was incurable and incurable. No spiritual medicine, arcane art or cultivation method could do anything about it. Only the most fundamental power in this world could heal it. In addition, a single source of power was also useless. The 9 forces of metal, wood, water, fire, earth, thunder, blood, wind, and cloud had to be gathered together to help him change the 5 elements, cleanse his blood, temper his bones with wind and thunder, and solidify his form with the help of the clouds. Only then could he be reborn and fully healed. However, in order to complete this task, would need the 9 supremes to gather. This has stumped me. This stumped me, because this matter had far exceeded the scope of my authority. It's not just a question of whether I can do it. Not to mention that I can't find the 9 supremes. Even if we could meet 1 or 2 of them, there wouldn't be much of a chance for us to talk. Let's just say that the 9 Supremes Lords have been assisting Yutong's battlefield all year round. How can we trouble the 9 Supremes Lords for one family? Not to mention the fact that His Majesty has already ordered everyone to gather information about the 9 Supremes. I've worried about this day and night. I've ventured to the residence of 9 Supremes many times, but I've never had the chance to meet him. Then, Father told me that he could ask for help from the 9 Supremes himself because he had a treasure that could move the 9 Supremes to help him, the 9-beam rainbow herb. As long as he can see the 9 Supremes, he'll exchange the 9-beam rainbow herb for a chance to live. If the 9 Supremes still don't agree, then he'll use my name to beg. Yunyang sighed. You believe that? 9 Sky Rainbow Herb. It was the legendary divine item of heaven and earth, a creation item of absolute class. The 9 Firmament Rainbow Herb was an extremely miraculous item. According to legend, when the sky was filled with endless purple clouds, 9 rainbows would appear. The moment these 9 rainbows appeared, lightning would descend from the sky. If this lightning struck someone, then the 9 rainbows in the sky would enter the dantian of this person. If this person was a Xian cultivator, then the 9 rainbows would transform into the 9 Firmament Rainbow Herb in his dantian. The 9-beam rainbow herb had 9 colors and 9 leaves. Each leaf had the purest luster. If someone ate all 9 leaves of the 9-beam rainbow herb, not only would he be immortal and invincible, he would also have the cultivation base of a god that could shatter the heavens with one hand and shatter the earth with a stomp of his feet. It would not be an exaggeration to call him an eternal immortal. If it was shared among 9 people, these 9 people would become long-lasting brothers, establishing the foundation of immortalhood. As long as everyone worked together, they could become eternal immortals in time. However, the above was only a legend. Without actual proof, no one would take it seriously. First of all, the conditions for the emergence of the 9-beam rainbow herb were too harsh. Not to mention how many years it took for the purple clouds to appear, the fact that 9 rainbows had to appear at the same time when the purple clouds filled the sky was something that might not even happen once in a billion years. What was even more ridiculous was that there had to be thunder and lightning at this time. When the purple clouds filled the sky and rainbows followed, it would most likely be a sunny day. How could there be thunder and lightning at that time? Therefore, the timing was very unlikely. Not to mention that the lightning had to fall and strike a person, and this person had to be a mystical cultivator. This was even more ridiculous. How could there be so many coincidences in the world? Furthermore, even if all of the above were true, the 9 Firmament Rainbow Herb had to be nurtured and grown in that lucky person's dantian. Since the rainbow herb had such miraculous effects, the amount of nutrients it needed during its growth must be astonishing. What kind of mystic cultivator could afford it? Furthermore, even if a mystic cultivator could afford it, it should be someone with considerable attainments in Xian Qi. Who would be willing to sacrifice themselves for a blade of grass and another person? Chapter 257. Yang Buotao's expression was mournful as he chuckled bitterly. If it were someone else, I wouldn't believe it, but it was my father. My biological father. My father had also asked me to check his dantian. I've checked and there's really a plant with 9 leaves in his dantian. Once I checked, I felt that my cultivation base has improved. It's not a lie. If it's not a peerless treasure, how could it be so miraculous? My father said that there are two of you now. The first one is to let me eat this herb so that I can live forever. However, the rainbow herb is something that the heavens are jealous of. It must be plucked before the host dies, and before it is plucked, the host cannot commit suicide. In other words, I need to kill my own father in order to obtain the rainbow herb of the 9 firmament. As for the second option, it's to exchange the 9-beam rainbow herb for the 9 supremes' help. The reason my father is suffering from such an injury is because he's nurtured this herb. This herb is envied by the heavens, and only by gathering the 9 energies can he escape this disaster and let my father live. My father finished and said that I'll choose between the 2 options. No matter what I choose, my father won't have any complaints. The more Yang Butao spoke, the more excited he became and the smoother his speech became. A tinge of redness appeared on her originally pale face. Yun Yang sighed, knowing that Yang Butao was already in a state of terminal lucidity. He could die at any time, his soul going to the netherworld. I'm ashamed to say this. I hesitated then, fantasizing about becoming an eternal immortal. Yang Butao chuckled bitterly, but I decided immediately that I had to save my father no matter what. I had to help my father survive. By then, the 9 Supremes Lords who had obtained the 9-beam rainbow herb would have a great increase in their abilities and become a true legend of Yutong, forever dominating Yutong. Yun Yang was completely dumbfounded as he spoke. He really did not expect that there would be such a reversal from the beginning of the matter. Was this a reversal of fate? Was this the original intention of the person who schemed against the 9 brothers? I told my father about my decision, and he said that before I could seek help from the 9 Supremes, I still needed to find a miraculous herb called the Heartbreak Herb. As long as the 9 Supremes' location was confirmed, my father would be able to suppress his injuries temporarily after consuming the Heartbreak Elixir and negotiate with the 9 Supremes. Once the deal is done, when the venom of the heartbroken sorrow acts up, cut open his dantian and take out the 9-beam rainbow herb for the 9 Supremes to consume. Then, we'll transfer the spiritual energy to reconstruct my father's flesh and blood and condense the 5 elements into his body. Only then can the curse of death be completely lifted. It will be a happy ending for all. Other than that, my father wanted me to make a vow that if the 9 Supremes were unwilling to help, or if the 9 Supremes could not be gathered in the end, he would only have a fleeting opportunity to consume the heartbreaking sorrow. If he missed it, he would not be able to live anymore. However, he wanted me to not hold a grudge against the 9 Supremes. After all, we are all citizens of Yutong. The 9 Supremes are too important. I must not hold a grudge against the 9 Supremes for a family matter. Yang Butao's expression was one of shock. At that time, I completely believed what my father said. I've even been worried that my father would die if the 9 Supremes did not agree to it. From then on, I became an orphan again. The sorrow of wanting to raise a child, but his parents are gone, will come again. It was also from that day onwards that I started collecting all the information about the 9 Supremes, any information, everything. For this, I've even bribed many people. I've always wanted to talk to the 9 Supremes, but I never had the chance. Finally, one day when I came out of the palace, I heard that His Majesty wanted to meet the 9 Supreme Earth. I've been waiting in the palace with great effort and finally spoke to Supreme Earth. Lord Supreme Earth, I have something I need your help with. I wonder if it's convenient. At that time, Supreme Earth said in surprise, "What matter does Marshal Yang need from me? I'll come to your residence to look for you later." I went home happily, waiting for Supreme Earth to come and complete the important matter in my heart. However, Supreme Earth did not come that night. What I waited for was His Majesty's edict the next day, reprimanding me and depriving me of half a year's worth of salary to atone for my crime. I finally knew that the path of simply waiting for an opportunity was destined to be a dead end. Who knew that a few days later, someone in the palace would suddenly tell me that the 9 Supremes were going to do something important? At that time, I only knew that the opportunity had come and that it would never come again if I missed it. Yun Yang's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. He asked, "Who told you this?" "The Minister of Imperial Household, Jiang Zhong." Yang Butao gritted his teeth hatefully. How could I miss this last chance? So I went around asking where the 9 Supremes Lords were going. It was also at that time that another person came to me and told me that the 9 Supremes needed to bring 800 warriors to complete this mission. This person was Fu Baogua. I was chatting with him in the board of military then and accidentally brought it up. He didn't say anything else after that. I was overjoyed then, thinking that heaven always blesses the kind, taking pity on me for saving my father's life and receiving this information. Yun Yang truly did not know what he was feeling at this moment. Ring after ring, wrapped around Yang Butao's body, it was truly, extremely exquisite and tight. Yang Butao had been asking for all the information about the 9 Supremes. These people who were on good terms with him would also help him in his search. Whether it was intentional or not, even if they leaked the information to Yang Butao, there was no way to prove that this person was the Four Seasons Tower's spy. In spite of this, such a plan was shocking to hear. My only thought at that time was to find the 9 Supremes. The movement of 800 people was far from what the 9 Supremes could do alone. There were finally traces. After all, I was a marshal, it was easy for me to know about these movements. After many observations, I finally confirmed that a small troop had left Tiantang City and headed east. That small troop must be where the 9 Supremes were. I knew that this was the only chance to ascertain the whereabouts of the 9 Supremes, so I went back and told my father about it. My father consumed the heartbreak pill and the life-replenishing pill at once to recover his 10th perfection cultivation base and went after the 9 Supremes through the night. Since then, I've been waiting for my father's news. I hope that when my father recovers and returns, when the 9 Supremes' names shake the world and become invincible experts, they will become the immortal legend of Yutong. Yutong will no longer have to fight and Tianxian will be conquered. Sometimes, I wonder how my father's cultivation base could be so high. Yet, I convinced myself that my father must have had a fortuitous encounter. If he didn't have such a cultivation base, how could he have nurtured the 9-beam rainbow herb? There are so many experts out there. As a son, I should be honored to have such a father. How could I doubt my own father? What an unfilial descendant. I've been waiting. But in the end, what I waited for was a nightmare that felt like the sky had fallen. The 9 Supremes were ambushed in Tianxian Cliff, none of them survived. This news was like a bolt from the blue. It broke me down on the spot. I was eating then and accidentally smashed the entire table into smithereens. It was as if I had lost my soul. Never would I have dreamed that it would be such an outcome. But that was my biological father. Not to mention that his face, aura, and love for me remained the same. He knew everything about me since I was young, including how mischievous I was when I was young, what birthmark I had on my body, my real father. How could I doubt my own father? Everything he did, all his thoughts and actions were reasonable, within reason, even righteous. Why should I doubt him? If the nightmare hadn't come, I wouldn't have believed it at all. But the truth was right before my eyes. How could I not know that there's something wrong with my father, and it's because of the information I provided. I, Yang Butao, have become the empire of Yutong's unforgivable sinner. Yang Butao's eyes were filled with bewilderment as he repeated, sinner. He was a sinner for all eternity. Yun Yang sighed inwardly. He did not know what to say. Yang Butao's breath gradually weakened as he spoke. His face grew paler and paler. He struggled with all his might and pleaded softly, Lord Supreme Wind, give me a breath, let me finish. Yun Yang sighed and pressed his hand against the center of his back, sending a wisp of refined mystical qi over. I wanted to bring this matter to my grave. I didn't even tell my wife. This is the shame of my life. It's better to say that I'm a completely bad person. But when I saw Lord Supreme Wind that day, Lord Supreme Wind had clearly pointed his target at me. I had the urge to let it all out. It was only just now that I finally decided to tell everyone about this matter. I don't want my wife to still ignore me when she's in the underworld. I don't want my wife to still think that her husband is a hypocrite, a treacherous, unpardonable person even when she's in the underworld. She has entrusted her life to the wrong person. Yang Buotao's gaze was unfocused as he held his breath forcefully and mumbled to himself. She won't. Yun Yang sighed. Yun Yang really did not know what to say at this point. So many of his brothers had died because of his intelligence, yet he had to comfort him instead? But who could be blamed for this? More than 10 days later, my father came back. He said he wanted to bring me far away. He would even give me a brighter future. Yang Buotao said weakly. I asked him frantically, why? Why did he do this? Why? Extreme insanity flashed in Yang Buotao's eyes. Actually, I had already vaguely guessed then that my father was from the Four Seasons Tower, and he was one of the Four Seasons Tower's higher-ups. If it wasn't so, I would have been silenced. But I still wanted to ask, to get to the bottom of this, to get to the bottom of it. I couldn't accept it. I had fought for Yutong my entire life, but in the end, I became a sinner. My father told me directly that the existence of the 9 Supremes was a huge threat and that they had to be eliminated. It would be the continent's fortune if all of them died. This wasn't a family matter, it was something that should be done, something that should be done. But I didn't understand, I really didn't. Then I asked him, was the 9-beam rainbow herb real? He said it was fake. Everything was a lie to ascertain the whereabouts of the 9 Supremes. Yang Buotao, was the most important part of this lie. Ha. And the one who triggered this most important part of me was my biological father. Ha. Yang Buotao's voice was bleak. Although he was laughing, his laughter was self-deprecating, his gaze empty and dead. If I were to die in the battlefield, die of illness, die of poison, I, Yang Buotao, could smile and be fearless. But to die like this, because of such a reason, to bear the eternal infamy, a humiliation that could never be washed away, I, Yang Buotao, would not die in peace. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.